She called him a tyrant in front of his entire board and lived to tell the tale. Most people who challenged Sebastian Wolf disappeared into corporate graveyards or worse. But Scarlett Hayes wasn't most people. On her first day as his assistant, she threw his disrespect back in his face, refusing to bow to the man who built empires on fear and blood. He should have destroyed her. Instead, he became obsessed. What happens when the city's most dangerous billionaire meets the one woman who won't break? Stay until the end to see how their collision rewrites everything. Hit like and comment your city so I can see how far this story travels. The elevator to the 72nd floor felt like ascending into hell wrapped in marble and gold. Scarlett Hayes gripped her worn leather portfolio tighter, her knuckles whitening as the numbers climbed. 43, 51, 62. Each floor marked a step closer to a man whose reputation preceded him like a winter storm, cold, merciless, and capable of destroying everything in its path. Sebastian Wolf. The name alone commanded silence in boardrooms across 3 continents. At 35, he'd built an empire that stretched from legitimate tech innovations to whispered underworld operations that even seasoned journalists wouldn't touch. Wolf Industries was the gleaming facade. What lay beneath, the network of power, influence, and carefully orchestrated control, remained hidden from those who valued their lives. Scarlett had done her research. 3 assistants in 2 years. All quit without explanation, their LinkedIn profiles scrubbed clean of any mention of their time with Wolf. The rumors ranged from impossible demands to something far darker, though no one would speak on record. She needed this job anyway. Her mother's medical bills wouldn't wait for perfect circumstances. Stage 4 lymphoma didn't care about Scarlett's pride or her decade-old college degree that had promised so much and delivered so little. The salary Wolf Industries offered for an executive assistant position was obscene, triple the market rate, which meant the job would be hell. She'd take hell over watching her mother deteriorate without treatment. The elevator chimed. 72. The doors opened onto a reception area that looked like it had been carved from ice and ambition. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Manhattan skyline, the morning sun casting sharp shadows across furniture that probably cost more than most people's annual salaries. Everything was chrome, glass, and cold perfection. A woman with silver hair and an expression that suggested she'd forgotten how to smile decades ago looked up from a pristine desk. Her eyes swept over Scarlett with the efficiency of a security scan. "Miss Hayes, you're early." "I believe in punctuality." "Mr. Wolf believes in excellence." The woman, her nameplate read Victoria Chen, Senior Executive Administrator, stood with the posture of someone who'd spent years perfecting the art of intimidation through professionalism. "You'll wait here. When he's ready, you'll be summoned, not before." Summoned, like she was approaching royalty rather than an employer. Scarlett took a seat on a chair that managed to be both beautiful and deeply uncomfortable, clearly designed to remind visitors they didn't belong. She'd worn her best suit, charcoal gray, professional, the one she saved for interviews and funerals. It had seemed appropriate for both. 20 minutes passed. Then 40. Other executives arrived, each greeted by Victoria with varying degrees of warmth that suggested a complex hierarchy Scarlett hadn't yet learned to decode. They disappeared through double doors of frosted glass, heading toward what she assumed was the inner sanctum. At the 60-minute mark, Scarlett stood. Victoria's eyes snapped up. "Sit down, Miss Hayes. I've been waiting an hour for a meeting that was scheduled for 9 o'clock sharp. Either Mr. Wolf is ready to see me, or he's wasting my time." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. 2 junior executives who'd been whispering near the coffee station fell silent, watching with the morbid fascination of people witnessing a car crash in slow motion. Victoria's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Surprise, maybe, or recognition of someone who'd just signed their own termination papers. "Mr. Wolf does not appreciate—" "I don't appreciate games." Scarlett kept her voice level, professional, but firm. "I was told to be here at 9 for a final interview. It's now 10:03. I'm happy to proceed with the meeting or happy to leave, but I won't sit here being tested like a first-year intern." For a long moment, silence stretched taut as a wire. Then Victoria picked up her phone, pressed a single button, and spoke quietly. "Sir, Miss Hayes would like to know if you're ready to see her. She's indicated she'll leave if you're not. Scarlett couldn't hear the response, but Victoria's eyebrows rose fractionally. He'll see you now. Victoria stood, gesturing toward the frosted glass doors. Though I should warn you, Miss Hayes, Mr. Wolf doesn't respond well to ultimatums. Then he shouldn't issue them. The walk to Sebastian Wolf's office felt longer than it was. Victoria opened the doors and stepped aside, and Scarlett entered a space that redefined the concept of power. The office occupied a corner of the building, windows on two sides offering a view of Manhattan that made the city look like a kingdom waiting to be conquered. The decor was minimalist but expensive. Dark wood, leather, and metal combined in ways that suggested taste refined by endless resources. And behind a desk that looked like it had been carved from a single piece of obsidian sat Sebastian Wolf. The photographs didn't do him justice. Or maybe they did him too much justice, failing to capture the intensity that rolled off him like heat from a flame. He was tall, even sitting down, broad-shouldered, with dark hair styled with just enough dishevelment to suggest he didn't care while still looking perfect. His suit was black, custom-tailored to emphasize a build that spoke of disciplined gym time and controlled violence. But it was his eyes that stopped her breath. Gray, like storm clouds, and utterly cold. He didn't stand, didn't smile, didn't offer any of the social niceties that usually accompanied professional meetings. He simply looked at her, his gaze moving from her face down to her shoes and back up with the clinical assessment of someone evaluating an acquisition. Scarlett Hayes! His voice was deep, smooth, and completely devoid of warmth. The woman who thinks she can dictate terms to me. The woman who values her time and assumes you value yours. Scarlett moved to the chair across from his desk but didn't sit. Not until invited. That was the game. Push back, but know the rules well enough not to break them completely. Sit. She sat. Sebastian leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled under his chin. Tell me why you think you're qualified to work for me. My resume is mediocre. He said it casually, as if commenting on the weather. State college degree, mid-tier GPA, 7 years bouncing between administrative positions at companies that no longer exist or don't matter. You have no special skills, no notable achievements, and based on your employment history, you can't seem to hold a job for more than 18 months. Each word landed like a carefully placed blow. Scarlett felt heat rising in her chest, but she kept her expression neutral. Then why am I here? Because my HR department thought your tenacity during the application process showed promise. I think it shows desperation. He tilted his head slightly. Which is it, Miss Hayes? Both. That seemed to surprise him. The cold mask flickered. I need this job, Scarlett continued, meeting his gaze directly. My mother is sick, and I am out of options. So yes, I'm desperate. But desperation doesn't make me incompetent. I've worked for difficult executives before. No, you haven't. I've worked for demanding. You've worked for people who thought they were important. Sebastian stood, and the movement was fluid, controlled, like a predator uncoiling. He walked to the windows, hands in his pockets, looking out over the city he partially owned. You've worked for small men with inflated egos who confuse cruelty with strength. I am not those men, Miss Hayes. I don't need to perform my power. I simply exercise it. He turned, and the light from the windows backlit him, making him look like something carved from shadow and ice. If you work for me, you will have no personal life. No weekends, no holidays when I need you, no phone calls that I don't approve, no commitments that supersede mine. You will be available every hour of every day, and when I call, you will answer. Is that clear? No. The word dropped into the silence like a stone into still water. Sebastian's expression didn't change, but something sharpened in his eyes. Excuse me? I said no. Scarlett stood, matching his power play with one of her own. I'm willing to work hard. I'm willing to sacrifice. But I won't be a slave, Mr. Wolf. I have a mother who needs me, and if I'm going to care for her, I need boundaries. Reasonable boundaries. I'll give you 60 hours a week of excellent work. I'll be responsive, professional, and exceed every expectation. But I won't give you my soul. My last 3 assistants gave me everything I asked for. And where are they now? His jaw tightened fractionally. They found the position unsuitable to their temperament. Because you broke them. Scarlett took a step closer, ignoring every instinct that screamed at her to back down. You tested them until they shattered, and then you discarded them. I won't break, Mr. Wolf. Not for you, not for anyone. So either hire me with the understanding that I'm a human being with limits, or let me leave so we both stop wasting time. For a long moment, Sebastian simply stared at her. Then, incredibly, the corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. You're either very brave or very foolish, Miss Hayes. I'm practical, and I'm good at my job. Better than good. But I won't pretend to be property. Sebastian walked back to his desk, each step measured and deliberate. He pressed a button on his phone. Victoria, have HR prepare standard employment contracts for Miss Hayes. Shh, she starts tomorrow. He looked up at Scarlett, and for the first time she saw something other than ice in his eyes. Interest, maybe, or the focused attention of a predator that had just spotted something worth hunting. 7 a.m. sharp, Miss Hayes. Don't be late. I won't. And Miss Hayes? He leaned forward slightly. That speech about boundaries and limits? Consider it your one free pass. The next time you challenge me, there will be consequences. As long as those consequences are professional and legal, Mr. Wolf, I can handle them. She turned and walked out, feeling his gaze on her back like the weight of winter frost. The apartment Scarlett returned to that evening was a stark contrast to the gleaming luxury of Wolf Industries. Small, dated, with the kind of worn carpet and yellowing walls that spoke of decades of tenants and minimal maintenance. But it was clean, and it was hers. And most importantly, it was close to the hospital where her mother spent most of her days. Eleanor Hayes was asleep when Scarlett arrived, her thin frame barely making an impression under the blankets. The home health nurse, a kind woman named Patricia, who worked for half what she was worth because she actually cared, looked up from her tablet and smiled. She had a good day, ate most of her lunch, even watched some of that cooking show she likes. Any pain? Managed with the regular meds. No breakthrough doses needed. Patricia gathered her things, preparing to leave. You look exhausted, honey. Long day? I got a new job. That's wonderful. Doing what? Selling my soul to the devil, apparently. Patricia laughed, thinking it was a joke. Scarlett wasn't entirely sure it was. After Patricia left, Scarlett sat beside her mother's bed, watching the shallow rise and fall of her chest. Eleanor had been beautiful once, vibrant, full of life and laughter. Cancer had stolen that, replacing it with frailty and pain that no amount of morphine could completely erase. I met him today, Mom, Scarlett whispered, taking her mother's cool hand. Sebastian Wolf. Everything they say about him is probably true. He's cold and arrogant and definitely hiding something dark. Eleanor stirred slightly but didn't wake. But the money will cover your treatment. The experimental trial at Johns Hopkins. The one Dr. Chen said might actually work. Scarlett squeezed her mother's hand gently. So I'll do this. I'll work for a man who looks at people like they're chess pieces. I'll smile and nod and be professional, and I'll save every penny until we can afford the treatment that might save your life. She stayed there until the sun set, painting the room in shades of amber and shadow, then finally forced herself to eat something and prepare for tomorrow. Her first day working for Sebastian Wolf. She had no idea how much it would change everything. 7 a.m. arrived with the kind of cold clarity that March mornings in New York specialized in. Scarlett dressed with military precision, navy suit, white blouse, minimal jewelry, professional armor for a professional battle. She'd braided her dark blonde hair into a neat twist, applied just enough makeup to look polished without looking like she was trying too hard, and checked her reflection one final time. She looked competent, professional, ready. The lie was almost convincing. The office was already humming when she arrived at 6:50. Victoria greeted her with an expression that suggested she'd expected Scarlett to quit overnight. Miss Hayes, prompt. I believe we established that punctuality matters. Indeed. Victoria handed her a tablet, a security badge, and a phone that looked expensive enough to require its own insurance policy. Your schedule is on the tablet. Mr. Wolf's preferences, meeting protocols, and contact lists are all preloaded. The phone is for business only. It's monitored, encrypted, and tracked. Don't use it for personal calls. Understood. Mr. Wolf arrives at 7:30. He expects his coffee waiting. Black, single-origin Ethiopian, precisely 185 degrees. His morning briefing should be prepared and ready to present at 7:45. You'll accompany him to all meetings unless explicitly dismissed. Questions should be saved for designated times. And Miss Hayes? Victoria's expression softened almost imperceptibly. Don't mistake his interest for kindness. Mr. Wolf doesn't do kind. Before Scarlett could respond, the elevator chimed. Sebastian Wolf stepped out, and the office's energy shifted immediately. People straightened, conversations lowered. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. He wore another black suit, this one with a dark gray tie that matched his eyes. His presence filled the space without him having to say a word, and Scarlett understood something fundamental. This man didn't need to announce his power because everyone already felt it. His gaze found her instantly. Miss Hayes, my office, 5 minutes. He disappeared through the frosted glass doors without waiting for a response. Scarlett looked at Victoria. The coffee? Already brewing, 185 degrees, as specified. The next 5 minutes were a crash course in controlled chaos. Scarlett prepared the coffee with the precision of a chemist, gathered the morning briefing documents, and crossed herself mentally before entering Sebastian's office. He was on the phone, speaking in what sounded like fluent Mandarin. He gestured for her to set the coffee down and wait. She did, standing with perfect posture while he concluded a conversation that seemed to involve significant amounts of money and veiled threats delivered with the kind of politeness that made them more menacing. He ended the call and finally acknowledged her. The briefing. Scarlett opened the tablet, grateful she'd spent the previous evening memorizing the format. You have a board meeting at 9, conference call with the Tokyo office at 11, lunch with Senator Morrison at 1:30, and a meeting with legal at 4 regarding the acquisition of Meridian Technologies. Morrison is moving the lunch to dinner. Arrange it. Of course. Preferences for the venue? Somewhere public. He's being investigated for campaign finance violations and wants witnesses that our meeting is legitimate business. Sebastian picked up his coffee, took a single sip, and set it down. The temperature is off. Scarlett's stomach tightened. I followed the specifications exactly. Then the specifications were wrong. Figure it out. He turned to his computer, dismissing her. Scarlett stood there for a moment, torn between defending herself and recognizing a pointless battle. She chose retreat, taking the coffee cup and making a mental note to adjust the temperature by 2 degrees tomorrow. The morning proceeded with relentless efficiency. Sebastian moved through meetings like a force of nature, his mind processing information faster than most people could speak. Scarlett took notes, fielded calls, and managed a schedule that seemed designed to break the human need for food or rest. At 12:30, Victoria appeared at her desk. Mr. Wolf doesn't eat lunch. Ever? He considers it a waste of time. You'll learn to do the same if you want to keep pace. Scarlett's stomach growled in protest, but she ignored it, diving back into the endless stream of emails that required Sebastian's attention, which meant they required hers. The board meeting had been her first real exposure to Sebastian in his element, and it had been terrifying in its efficiency. 12 executives, men and women with decades of experience and billions in collective net worth, sat around a table like students awaiting judgment. Sebastian had walked in, taken his seat at the head of the table, and proceeded to dismantle 3 proposals and approve 2 in under 40 minutes. He didn't raise his voice once. He didn't need to. When one executive, a silver-haired man named Patterson, who clearly thought his tenure gave him special status, suggested a delay on a particular acquisition, Sebastian had simply looked at him. Your recommendation is noted and rejected. We proceed as planned. Sir, with respect, the market timing, your understanding of market timing is why you manage regional operations and not global strategy, Patterson. The acquisition happens Friday. Make it work. Patterson had gone pale but nodded, and that had been that. Now, at 4:30, Scarlett sat outside Sebastian's office while he met with the legal team, trying to make sense of a filing system that seemed designed by someone actively hostile to logic. The doors opened. The lawyers filed out, looking tired. Miss Hayes? She grabbed her tablet and entered. Sebastian was standing by the windows again, his favorite position. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the office, and for a moment he looked almost human, tired maybe, or thoughtful. Then he turned, and the illusion shattered. The Morrison dinner is at 8. Latitude Noir. Reservation for 3. 3. You'll attend. Sir, I'm not sure that's appropriate. I don't recall asking for your opinion on appropriateness, Miss Hayes. You'll attend, you'll take notes, and you'll ensure Morrison understands that anything discussed remains confidential. Wear something suitable for a five-star restaurant. Scarlett felt frustration building. Mr. Wolf, I don't have anything suitable for a five-star restaurant in my closet. Then acquire something. On what budget? I don't get paid until the end of the month, and Sebastian pulled out his wallet, extracted a black credit card, and held it out. Problem solved. I can't take your credit card. It's a corporate card for corporate expenses. This is a corporate dinner. Therefore, corporate resources apply. His tone suggested he was explaining something to a particularly slow child. Buy a dress, Miss Hayes. Something professional. I don't care about the cost, but I care about appearances. Do you understand? Yes, sir. Good. Car picks us up at 7:45. Don't be late. She took the card, their fingers brushing for a fraction of a second. The contact was electric, unexpected, and immediately forgotten as Sebastian turned back to his computer, dismissing her once again. Finding a dress on 2 hours' notice in Manhattan should have been impossible. Scarlett managed it anyway, driven by spite and the determination not to give Sebastian Wolf another reason to look at her with that particular expression of cold disappointment. The boutique was small, expensive, and staffed by a woman who took one look at Scarlett's corporate card and transformed into a fairy godmother with excellent taste and no budget constraints. The dress was midnight blue, fitted but not tight, elegant but not flashy. It hit just above her knees, had three-quarter sleeves, and somehow made her look like she belonged in five-star restaurants, even though her usual dining involved takeout containers and exhaustion. Shoes, minimal jewelry, and a clutch that cost more than her monthly grocery budget completed the ensemble. She made it back to her apartment with 40 minutes to spare, just enough time to check on her mother, stable, sleeping peacefully, before transforming from rumpled assistant to polished professional. The car Sebastian sent was a town car, black and sleek, with a driver who opened her door without comment and delivered her to Wolf Industries at exactly 7:44. Sebastian was waiting in the lobby. He'd changed suits, this one charcoal gray instead of black with a silver tie that caught the light. He looked like he'd stepped out of a magazine spread on powerful men and their expensive lifestyles. His eyes swept over her, head to toe, with the same clinical assessment he'd given her in their first meeting. But this time, something shifted in his expression. Acceptable. It was probably the closest thing to a compliment she'd get. The restaurant was everything its reputation promised. Dim lighting, impeccable service, and the kind of atmosphere where conversations were held in hushed tones because everyone assumed they were discussing matters worth millions. Senator Morrison was already seated when they arrived, a man in his early 60s with silver hair and the kind of practiced smile that came from decades of fundraising and photo ops. Sebastian, he stood, shaking hands with the warmth of someone who needed Sebastian more than Sebastian needed him. Good to see you, my friend. Senator? Sebastian's tone was polite but distant. This is my executive assistant, Scarlett Hayes. She'll be taking notes. Morrison's eyes flicked to Scarlett with interest that made her skin crawl before returning to Sebastian. Of course, of course. Always thorough, aren't you? They sat. Menus appeared and disappeared with the efficiency of well-trained magic. Wine was ordered, expensive, red, from a vineyard Scarlett had never heard of. And then the real conversation began. I need your support on the infrastructure bill, Morrison said, cutting into his steak with the confidence of someone used to getting what he wanted. The committee vote is in 3 weeks. Your lobbying team has been less than enthusiastic, because the bill is bloated with pork spending and politically toxic, Sebastian replied calmly, sipping his wine. Supporting it would damage my company's reputation with half the country. Your company's reputation is already complicated, Sebastian. Let's not pretend otherwise. The temperature at the table dropped several degrees. Scarlett's pen hovered over her tablet, uncertain whether to record what felt like a veiled threat. Sebastian's expression didn't change, but something predatory entered his eyes. Are you threatening me, Senator? I'm reminding you that our relationship is mutually beneficial. I've helped smooth certain regulatory issues for Wolf Industries, issues that could become unsmoothed if I felt our partnership was unbalanced. I see. Sebastian set down his wine glass with deliberate care, And if I were to support your bloated, politically disastrous infrastructure bill, you would continue to ensure my regulatory issues remain smooth? Exactly. No. Morrison blinked. Excuse me? I said no, Senator. I don't respond well to extortion, even when it's dressed up as political cooperation. Sebastian leaned back in his chair, utterly relaxed despite the tension crackling across the table. Your regulatory assistance has been appreciated, but it's not irreplaceable. My legal team is excellent. If you'd like to create problems for me, by all means try. But understand that I have significantly more resources and considerably less to lose in a public fight than you do. Sebastian. We're done here, Senator. Enjoy your meal. The company will cover the check. Sebastian stood, buttoning his jacket with the same precision he applied to everything. Scarlett scrambled to follow, gathering her things while Morrison sat there, stunned and clearly calculating his next move. They were in the car before she found her voice. That was intense. That was Morrison realizing he doesn't have the leverage he thought he did. Sebastian looked out the window at the passing city lights. Did you get everything documented? Every word. Good. Send it to my personal legal team, encrypted, tonight. Of course. Scarlett paused, choosing her next words carefully. He threatened you. He tried to threaten me. There's a difference. Aren't you worried about what he might do? Sebastian turned to look at her, and in the dim light of the car, his eyes looked almost warm. Almost. Miss Hayes, men like Morrison operate on the assumption that everyone is as afraid of exposure as they are. They forget that some of us have nothing left to hide that the world doesn't already suspect. He'll make noise, file some complaints, maybe leak a story to a friendly journalist. And my team will bury him so thoroughly he'll spend the next 5 years just trying to remember what daylight looks like. It should have sounded like arrogance. Instead, it sounded like fact. The car pulled up to her apartment building, modest, slightly shabby, and completely out of place in the narrative of expensive restaurants and corporate power plays. Sebastian noticed, of course. He noticed everything. This is where you live? Yes. It's not safe. It's affordable. There's a difference. She gathered her clutch, preparing to exit. Thank you for dinner, Mr. Wolf. I'll send the documentation within the hour. Scarlett. It was the first time he'd used her first name. She froze, hand on the door handle. You did well tonight. Better than well. Morrison is a difficult man to read, and you caught nuances in your notes that I might have missed. He paused. That's not something I say lightly. Thank you, sir. Sebastian. His voice was quiet. When we're alone, you can call me Sebastian. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak, and climbed out of the car. As it pulled away, Scarlett stood on the sidewalk, watching the taillights disappear into the Manhattan night. Everything about Sebastian Wolf screamed danger. The coldness, the control, the carefully maintained distance that suggested he saw people as chess pieces rather than human beings. But tonight, for just a moment, she'd seen something else, something almost vulnerable. And that, she realized as she climbed the stairs to her apartment, might be the most dangerous thing of all. Because curiosity about a man like Sebastian Wolf was a gateway to catastrophe, and she was already curious. The pattern established itself with brutal efficiency over the following weeks. Scarlett arrived at 6:50 every morning. Sebastian arrived at 7:30. The coffee was always exactly 183 degrees now. She'd tested variations until she found the temperature that didn't earn his disapproval. The briefings were prepared, the schedule managed, the endless stream of calls and meetings navigated with the precision of someone walking a tightrope without a net. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the dynamic shifted. It started small. Sebastian asking her opinion on a contract clause instead of just issuing orders. A nod of approval when she anticipated his needs before he voiced them. The way his morning greeting evolved from a curt nod to something approaching acknowledgement. Miss Hayes. Mr. Wolf. Always formal. Always professional, but the ice was developing cracks. 3 weeks into her employment, Scarlett was working late, again, when Sebastian emerged from his office carrying his jacket over one arm. It was nearly 9, and the floor had emptied hours ago, leaving just the two of them in the fluorescent silence. You're still here. Scarlett looked up from the expense report she'd been reconciling. The quarterly statements need to be prepared for tomorrow's meeting. Victoria usually handles those. Victoria left at 6 with a migraine. I volunteered. Sebastian studied her for a moment, and she couldn't quite read his expression. You've been here since 6:50 this morning. That's over 14 hours. 13 hours and 12 minutes, actually. She managed a tired smile. But who's counting? You should go home. After I finish this. Scarlett. There it was again, her first name, spoken in that low voice that made something flutter in her chest against her better judgment. The reports can wait until morning. You're exhausted. I'm fine. You're swaying in your chair. She straightened immediately, hating that he was right. The numbers on her screen had started blurring together 20 minutes ago, but she'd pushed through out of sheer stubbornness and the need to prove she could match his impossible standards. Sebastian crossed to her desk, and suddenly he was close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and understated that probably cost more than her rent. He reached past her and saved the document she'd been working on, then shut down her computer with the kind of gentle finality that left no room for argument. There's a car waiting downstairs. Take it home. I can take the subway. At 9 p.m. from this neighborhood? Absolutely not. His tone shifted, taking on an edge she recognized as non-negotiable. The car will take you home, wait while you check on your mother, and ensure you're safely inside before leaving. This is not a discussion. Scarlett wanted to argue, wanted to maintain the independence she'd fought so hard to establish. But exhaustion and the unexpected concern in his voice, however gruffly delivered, wore down her resistance. Thank you. Don't thank me. Just don't collapse at your desk. It's terrible for office morale. But there was the faintest hint of something in his eyes that looked almost like amusement. The car was waiting, just as he'd said. The driver, a quiet man named Marcus who'd driven her home from the Morrison dinner, greeted her with a nod and opened the door without comment. As they pulled away from the building, Scarlett looked back to see Sebastian still standing in the lobby, watching, making sure she actually left. Something warm and dangerous unfurled in her chest. She crushed it immediately. The next morning, a coffee appeared on her desk at 7:45. Not her usual cheap pod coffee from the break room, but something from the expensive cafe 2 blocks over that she'd never been able to justify buying. The note attached was written in sharp, angular handwriting. You're more useful, conscious. S.W. Scarlett found herself smiling despite herself. The dance continued, each day adding new layers to their carefully maintained professional relationship. Sebastian was still demanding, still cold in meetings, still the kind of boss who expected perfection and accepted nothing less. But in the small moments, the late evenings, the quiet exchanges between meetings, the brief conversations that didn't involve spreadsheets or strategy, something else emerged. A month in, Sebastian asked her about her mother. They were reviewing contracts in his office, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the floor, when he set down the document he'd been reading and looked at her directly. Your mother. The medical bills you mentioned in your interview. What's her diagnosis? Scarlett's pen stilled. Stage 4 lymphoma. Prognosis? Without the experimental treatment at Johns Hopkins, 6 months. Maybe less. She kept her voice steady through sheer force of will. With the treatment, there's a 40% chance of remission. And the cost? $250,000. Insurance won't cover experimental protocols. Sebastian was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable. How much have you saved? That's not really... How much, Scarlett? $32,000. It felt like admitting failure. I'm trying, but between rent and her current medications and the home health aid, it's slow going. Too slow. Yes. The word came out sharper than she intended. Yes, too slow. But it's what I have to work with, so I work with it. Sebastian picked up his phone, pressed a button. Victoria, contact our benefits administrator. I want to know if we can add advanced medical coverage to Miss Hayes' benefits package retroactive to her start date. Experimental treatments, comprehensive coverage, no lifetime maximums. Scarlett's heart stopped. Mr. Wolf, you can't... He held up a hand, still speaking to Victoria. And if there are regulatory issues, have legal find a workaround. I want an answer by end of business today. He ended the call and met Scarlett's shocked stare with his usual composure. You can't do this, she whispered. That's not... Company policy doesn't work that way. Benefits packages can't just be restructured for one person. I own the company, Scarlett. Policy is whatever I say it is. But why would you? Because you're valuable. He said it matter-of-factly, as if it were obvious. You've proven yourself competent, reliable, and discreet. Training a replacement would be expensive and time-consuming. Ensuring you're not distracted by preventable tragedy is simply good business. It was the most clinical possible way to describe an act of stunning generosity. And yet Scarlett saw something flicker in his eyes that suggested it wasn't entirely about business at all. I don't know what to say. Say you'll continue to do your job well. That's sufficient. But when she left his office 20 minutes later, hands shaking with relief and emotions she couldn't quite name, she heard him make one more call. Dr. Chen, Sebastian Wolf. I'm calling about a patient named Eleanor Hayes. I understand you recommended a clinical trial at Johns Hopkins. I need you to coordinate with my benefits administrator to ensure immediate enrollment. Scarlett stood frozen in the hallway, listening to him systematically dismantle every obstacle that had stood between her mother and treatment. This was the man people called cold, ruthless, heartless, and he was saving her mother's life. The clinical trial started 2 weeks later. Eleanor was accepted with a speed that defied normal medical bureaucracy. Her transition to Johns Hopkins smoothed by resources Scarlett couldn't have dreamed of accessing on her own. The doctors were optimistic, cautiously so, but optimistic nonetheless. For the first time in 8 months, Scarlett felt something other than crushing despair when she thought about her mother's future. And she owed it all to Sebastian Wolf. The gratitude should have made things easier between them. Instead, it complicated everything. Because now, when Sebastian looked at her across a conference table, she didn't just see her demanding boss. She saw the man who'd made a phone call that changed her entire world. When he issued orders in that clipped, authoritative tone, she heard the gentle way he'd spoken to her mother's oncologist, asking detailed questions about treatment protocols and side effects. The professional distance she'd maintained so carefully began developing fault lines. It was Victoria who noticed first. "Be careful," she said one afternoon, appearing at Scarlett's desk with the kind of maternal concern that seemed at odds with her usual icy professionalism. "I've seen this pattern before." "What pattern?" "The way he looks at you when he thinks no one's watching. The way you look at him when you know everyone is watching." Victoria's expression softened slightly. "Sebastian Wolf is many things, Miss Hayes, but safe is not one of them, especially for women who start believing they can change him." "I'm not trying to change anyone. I'm just doing my job." "That's what they all say." Victoria glanced toward Sebastian's office, where he was visible through the glass, on the phone and looking every inch the powerful executive. "He's not cruel without reason, but he is cruel when he needs to be. And he needs to be more often than you'd think." "What happened to the others? The assistants who quit?" Victoria's expression closed off. "They made the mistake of thinking proximity meant intimacy, that access meant affection. Sebastian doesn't do affection, Miss Hayes. He does transactions, arrangements, mutually beneficial relationships with clear parameters. The moment you forget that is the moment you become a liability." "I haven't forgotten." "See that you don't." But the warning came too late. Because that evening, everything changed. It started with a charity gala, the kind of event Sebastian normally avoided but couldn't this time, given that Wolf Industries was the primary sponsor. The Manhattan Elite Foundation's annual fundraiser, Black Tie, attended by everyone who mattered in the city's social and business circles. "You'll accompany me," Sebastian informed her that morning, the same way he might inform her of a meeting or conference call. "Sir, I'm your assistant, not your—" "The event requires a +1. My usual companions are unavailable, and attending alone invites speculation I'd prefer to avoid. You're professional, discreet, and capable of holding conversations with donors without embarrassing me. Those are the qualifications needed. I don't have anything appropriate to wear to a gala." He slid a black card across the desk, the same one from before. "Problem solved. Car picks you up at 6. Don't be late." This time, Scarlett didn't argue. The dress she found was midnight black, different from the blue one she'd worn to the Morrison dinner, but equally elegant. It hugged her curves without being scandalous, the neckline modest but flattering, the fabric whispering expensive with every movement. Her hair was styled in soft waves, makeup professional but subtle. When Marcus opened the car door and she stepped out in front of Sebastian's building at precisely 6 o'clock, she felt almost beautiful. Sebastian was waiting in the lobby, and when he saw her, he went very still. He wore a tuxedo that looked like it had been designed specifically for him, every line perfect, every detail immaculate. But it was the expression on his face that made Scarlett's breath catch, something raw and unguarded flickering across his features before the mask slammed back into place. "You look acceptable," he said, his voice slightly rougher than usual. "You look like a Bond villain," she replied, and immediately regretted the levity. But Sebastian's mouth curved, just barely, into something that might have been a smile. "I'll take that as a compliment." The gala was held at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, because of course it was. The venue dripped with old money and new power, crystal chandeliers casting light across marble floors, while the city's elite mingled beneath priceless artwork and whispered about deals and scandals in hushed, cultured tones. Sebastian navigated it all with the ease of someone who'd been born into this world, even if his personal empire had been built through far less genteel means. He introduced Scarlett as his executive assistant, nothing more, and she played her role perfectly. Charming but professional, engaged but not familiar. But she felt the weight of his hand on the small of her back as he guided her through the crowd. Noticed the way his attention tracked her even when he was deep in conversation with investors or board members. Caught the flash of something dark and possessive in his eyes when another man, some hedge fund manager with too much confidence, let his gaze linger too long on the curve of her dress. "Dance with me." It wasn't a request. Sebastian led her to the floor where couples swayed to music played by a live orchestra, pulled her close with one hand settling on her waist and the other capturing her fingers. This close, Scarlett could feel the controlled strength in his frame, the warmth of him bleeding through his tuxedo. Could see the faint scar above his left eyebrow that she'd never noticed before, the precise line of his jaw, the way his eyes had darkened to something closer to charcoal than gray. "You're staring," he murmured, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "So are you. I'm allowed. You work for me." "That's not how employment law works." His mouth twitched. "Are you planning to file a complaint, Miss Hayes?" "That depends." "Are you planning to stop being insufferable, Mr. Wolf?" "Absolutely not. It's part of my charm." "I wasn't aware you had any charm." "You'd be surprised what I have when properly motivated." The words hung between them, loaded with implications neither of them acknowledged. The song shifted, tempo slowing, and Sebastian pulled her incrementally closer. Not inappropriately so, nothing that would raise eyebrows among the other dancers, but enough that Scarlett could feel the steady beat of his heart against her own racing pulse. "Why did you really help my mother?" The question escaped before she could stop it. "And don't say it's good business. We both know that's not the whole truth." Sebastian was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "My mother died when I was 17. Cancer. We couldn't afford the experimental treatments that might have saved her. She suffered for 6 months before the end, and I couldn't do anything except watch." Scarlett's throat tightened. "Sebastian, I swore that if I ever had the resources to prevent someone else from experiencing that particular helplessness, I would. So when you mentioned your mother's condition," he trailed off, jaw tight. "Consider it a promise kept to someone who can't hear it anymore." The vulnerability in his admission stole her breath. "I'm sorry for your loss, and thank you for my mother, for everything." "Stop thanking me. You've earned everything you've received." "Have I earned this?" She gestured subtly to the gala, the dress, the dancing. "You've earned my respect, Scarlett. Everything else is just logistics." But the way he was looking at her suggested it was far more than logistics. The rest of the evening blurred past in a haze of champagne and careful conversation, networking and navigating the complex social hierarchies that governed events like this. Sebastian remained close, their interactions professional, but threaded through with an undercurrent of something neither of them named. It was nearly midnight when they finally escaped, stepping into the cool night air while Marcus brought the car around. "Thank you," Sebastian said quietly, "for tonight. You handled the donors better than most people I've brought to these events. Most people you've brought were probably more interested in being seen with you than actually helping." Perceptive. He studied her in the soft glow of the museum's exterior lighting. "You're not what I expected when I hired you." "What did you expect?" "Someone competent but forgettable. Someone who would do the job and disappear into the background. His voice dropped. You're neither of those things. Is that a problem? I haven't decided yet. The car arrived, cutting short whatever might have happened next. The drive to Scarlett's apartment was quiet, both of them lost in thoughts they didn't share. When they arrived, Sebastian surprised her by getting out of the car. You don't have to walk me up. I know. But he did anyway, matching her pace as they climbed the 3 flights of stairs to her floor. The hallway was dimly lit, smelling faintly of cooking and old carpet, such a stark contrast to the glamorous world they'd just left. Scarlett unlocked her door, then turned to face him. Tonight was unexpected. In a good way or a bad way? I'm still deciding. His mouth curved slightly. Fair enough. They stood there in the hallway, the space between them charged with possibilities and the weight of everything they weren't saying. Scarlett was acutely aware of how close he was, how the dim lighting cast shadows across his face, softening the harsh lines into something almost tender. Scarlett, Sebastian, this is a terrible idea. What is? Whatever this is becoming. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Nothing is becoming anything. You're my boss. I'm your assistant. That's all. Liar. The word was soft, almost gentle, but it hit like a physical blow. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? He took a half step closer, close enough that she could feel the heat of him, smell the faint trace of cologne and champagne. Tell me you haven't thought about it. About this. About what would happen if we stopped pretending that everything between us is purely professional. Even if I had, which I'm not admitting, it wouldn't matter. You just said it yourself. It's a terrible idea. The worst. His voice had dropped to barely above a whisper. Completely inadvisable. Potentially disastrous. Then we agree. Absolutely. Neither of them moved. Scarlett's breath caught as Sebastian lifted one hand, his fingers ghosting along her jawline with a touch so light she might have imagined it. His eyes searched hers, looking for something. Permission, maybe, or rejection, or any sign that she felt even a fraction of what was currently tearing through him. Tell me to leave, he said quietly. Tell me this is inappropriate and you want me gone and I'll walk away right now. No consequences, no repercussions, I swear it. She should have. Every rational thought in her head screamed at her to do exactly that, to maintain boundaries, to protect herself, to remember that men like Sebastian Wolf didn't do relationships or softness, or anything resembling the fairy tales she'd stopped believing in years ago. But standing there in her shabby hallway, wearing a dress he'd bought her after an evening where he'd held her close enough to count her heartbeats, rational thought deserted her completely. I can't, she whispered. Can't what? Can't tell you to leave. Something fierce and triumphant flashed across his face. Scarlett, but this is still a terrible idea. The worst, he agreed, his thumb tracing the curve of her lower lip. We'll regret it. Probably. Definitely. Does that mean you want me to stop? No. The word had barely left her lips before Sebastian kissed her. It wasn't gentle, wasn't tentative or exploratory or any of the things a first kiss should be. It was fierce and demanding, weeks of tension and unspoken want condensing into a moment of absolute clarity. His hands framed her face, angling her exactly where he wanted her, and Scarlett's fingers twisted in his jacket, pulling him closer even as some distant part of her brain continued to scream warnings about boundaries and professionalism and all the ways this could destroy everything. She ignored every warning. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Sebastian rested his forehead against hers. This doesn't change anything, she managed. Everything. His voice was rough. This changes everything. Sebastian, I know. Professional boundaries, office policies, the fact that I'm your boss, and this is categorically inappropriate. He pulled back just enough to meet her eyes. I know all of it, Scarlett, and I don't care. You should. I know that too. They stood there, caught between what they should do and what they wanted, the hallway silent except for their ragged breathing. Finally, Sebastian stepped back, putting necessary distance between them, even though every line of his body suggested he wanted to do the opposite. I should go. Yes. Before I do something even more inadvisable than what I've already done. That would be wise, but neither of them moved. Tomorrow, Sebastian said finally. We'll talk about this tomorrow. Figure out what it means. Set boundaries if that's what you want. And if it's not what I want? His eyes darkened. Then we'll figure out something else. He turned and walked toward the stairs, and Scarlett watched him go, her lips still tingling, her heart still racing, her entire world tilted off its axis. At the top of the stairs, Sebastian paused and looked back. For the record, Scarlett, you were the most beautiful woman at that gala tonight, and I've never regretted a terrible idea less than I regret this one. Then he was gone, leaving Scarlett standing in her doorway, one hand pressed to her mouth, wondering what the hell she'd just done, and whether tomorrow would bring clarity or catastrophe. Inside her apartment, she found her mother awake, sitting up in bed with a knowing smile. That was quite the good night, Eleanor said, her voice weak but amused. Your boss? Mom, I may be sick, sweetheart, but I'm not dead, and I saw the way you looked when you talked about him. Eleanor's expression turned serious. Just be careful. Men with that much power, they're not used to being told no. I know. Do you? Because from where I'm sitting, you looked like a woman falling, and falls from that height tend to hurt. Scarlett sank onto the edge of her mother's bed, still in her gala dress, makeup probably smudged, looking nothing like the competent professional she'd been that morning. I think I'm already falling, Mom. The question is whether he'll catch me or let me crash. Eleanor reached out, taking her daughter's hand. Then make sure you know which it'll be before you hit the ground. Wise advice. Scarlett just wasn't sure she could follow it, because when it came to Sebastian Wolf, she was beginning to suspect that falling and crashing might be the same thing. And she was already too far gone to stop. Morning arrived with the kind of cold clarity that made last night's kiss feel like a fever dream. Scarlett stood in front of her bathroom mirror, trying to reconcile the woman staring back at her with the professional assistant who'd maintained perfect boundaries for 6 weeks. Her lips were still slightly swollen, a physical reminder that it hadn't been a dream at all. Sebastian Wolf had kissed her in her hallway, had looked at her like she was something precious and dangerous all at once, and then he'd walked away promising they'd talk about it. The prospect of that conversation filled her with equal parts anticipation and dread. She dressed with extra care, navy suit, hair pulled into a flawless twist, makeup impeccable, armor for whatever came next. The train ride to the office felt longer than usual, every minute stretching as her mind replayed the evening in exhaustive detail. The way his hand had felt against her face, the controlled strength in his kiss, the rough edge to his voice when he'd said her name. The elevator to the 72nd floor moved too quickly and too slowly all at once. Victoria was already at her desk when Scarlett arrived at 6:45 earlier than usual, driven by nerves and the need to be prepared. The older woman looked up, her sharp eyes missing nothing as they swept over Scarlett's carefully composed appearance. He's already in, Victoria said quietly. Arrived at 6. Asked that you see him immediately when you got here. Scarlett's stomach dropped. Did he say why? He never says why. But he's been on the phone with his attorney for the past 20 minutes, so draw your own conclusions. The implication hung heavy in the air. Attorney, which meant either damage control or preparation for something significant. Neither option was particularly comforting. Scarlett set down her bag, smoothed her jacket, and walked toward the frosted glass doors with the composure of someone heading toward execution rather than conversation. Sebastian's office was flooded with early morning light, turning everything sharp and pitiless. He stood at his usual position by the windows, phone pressed to his ear, his posture radiating tension even from across the room. He was already in full business mode, dark suit, tie perfectly knotted, every inch the ruthless executive who'd built an empire through calculated moves and strategic ruthlessness. He saw her enter and held up one finger. Wait. She waited, closing the door behind her and standing with her hands clasped, professional and calm, despite the chaos churning through her. I don't care what it costs, Marcus. I want the file sealed and the records expunged. Use whatever leverage necessary. Sebastian's voice was clipped, commanding. No, I don't want excuses. I want results. By end of business today. He ended the call and turned to face her, and for a moment his expression was unguarded. Concern, maybe, or uncertainty, or something more complicated that vanished the instant their eyes met. Close the blinds. Scarlett moved to the wall panel, pressing buttons until the glass walls of his office frosted over, blocking them from the view of early arrivals and curious eyes. The sudden privacy felt intimate and dangerous. When she turned back, Sebastian had moved to his desk, his hands braced against the edge, head slightly bowed. The posture of a man carrying weight he hadn't asked for but couldn't set down. Last night was a mistake. The words hit like a physical blow, even though she'd half expected them. I see. Her voice came out steady, professional, giving away nothing of the hurt lancing through her chest. No, you don't. Sebastian looked up, and his eyes were storm gray and turbulent. Last night was a mistake because I crossed every professional boundary that exists between an employer and employee. I put you in a position where you might have felt pressured or coerced, where the power dynamic made genuine consent impossible. That was wrong of me. I wasn't coerced. You couldn't be sure of that. I'm your boss, Scarlett. I control your employment, your income, your ability to pay for your mother's treatment. That kind of leverage makes any personal relationship inherently problematic. So what are you saying? She forced herself to ask the question directly. That last night didn't mean anything? That it was just a momentary lapse in judgment you're already regretting? I'm saying it meant too much. The admission came out rough, almost angry. Which is why we need to address it now before this becomes something neither of us can walk back from. He straightened, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration that made him look younger, more human, less like the untouchable billionaire and more like a man genuinely conflicted. I've been thinking about this all night. There are only two options that don't result in either a lawsuit or me losing the best assistant I've ever had. 1. We pretend last night never happened, maintain strict professional boundaries, and continue exactly as we have been. 2. We acknowledge what's happening between us and restructure your employment to remove the power imbalance. Scarlett's heart hammered. Restructure how? You'd transfer to a different division, report to someone else, maintain your salary and benefits, but remove me from your direct chain of command. That way, anything that happens between us personally wouldn't be complicated by the professional relationship. You'd actually do that? Give up a good assistant because of one kiss? I'd do a lot more than that. His voice dropped, intense and absolute. I'd restructure the entire company if it meant removing every obstacle between us. But only if that's what you want, Scarlett. I won't make decisions for you. I won't assume. I need to hear it from you. She stood there, processing the magnitude of what he was offering. Most men in his position would have simply fired her to avoid complications, or worse, would have continued the relationship while maintaining the power imbalance and calling it romance. Sebastian was willing to fundamentally alter her role in his company, potentially making his own life more difficult, just to ensure she had genuine autonomy in any decision she made about them. It was possibly the most respectful thing anyone had ever done for her, and it terrified her. What do you want? She asked quietly. Not what's proper or professional or legally sound. What do you actually want? Sebastian was silent for a long moment, his jaw tight, clearly weighing honesty against self-preservation. Then, I want to kiss you again. I want to take you to dinner somewhere that isn't about business or networking or maintaining appearances. I want to know what you think about when you're not managing my schedule or taking notes in meetings. I want... He stopped, closing his eyes briefly. I want things I have no business wanting with someone who works for me. Then restructure my position. His eyes snapped open. Scarlett, I'm not saying yes to anything beyond that. I'm not promising a relationship or declaring feelings or making any commitments, but I'm saying that if you're willing to change my employment situation to remove the power dynamic, then I'm willing to explore what this could be without that hanging over us. You understand what you're agreeing to? The gossip it will generate when people realize you've transferred? The speculation about why? Let them speculate. I've survived worse than office gossip. And if it doesn't work, if we try this and it falls apart, then at least we'll know. And I'll still have my job in a different division, my mother's treatment will continue, and we'll both move on like adults. She took a step closer. But Sebastian, I need you to be honest with me about one thing. What? Is this just curiosity? Just you being intrigued by someone who said no to you? Because if this is about conquest or novelty or wanting something you can't easily have, Tell me now so I can walk away before I get hurt. The vulnerability in her question hung between them. Sebastian crossed the space separating them in 3 strides, stopping close enough that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. I have never wanted anything easily. Everything I have, I fought for, built for. Took when the world said I couldn't have it. His voice was low, intense, absolutely certain. But what I feel when I look at you has nothing to do with conquest and everything to do with the fact that you're the first person in a decade who's looked at me and seen something other than money or power or fear. You see me, Scarlett, the real me. And that's terrifying and intoxicating and completely unprecedented. I see a man who's very good at saying what people want to hear. Then let me prove I'm not just saying it. He lifted one hand, hesitating just before touching her face, giving her the chance to pull away. When she didn't, his palm cupped her cheek with a gentleness that contradicted everything his reputation suggested. Let me take you to dinner. No business, no networking. Just 2 people getting to know each other without spreadsheets or conference calls getting in the way. After you restructure my employment. After I restructure your employment, he confirmed. I'll have HR draw up the transfer paperwork today. You'll report to Jennifer Chen in the acquisitions division starting Monday. Same salary, same benefits, 0 direct interaction with me professionally. And personally? Personally, I'll pick you up Friday at 7. Wear something comfortable. No 5-star restaurants or client dinners. Just dinner and conversation and seeing where this goes. It was such a normal request, delivered by such an extraordinary man, that Scarlett almost laughed. Okay. Yes. Friday at 7. I'll be ready. Sebastian's thumb traced along her cheekbone, his eyes searching hers. This is still a terrible idea. The worst, she agreed, but I'm tired of only making safe choices. Safe is overrated anyway. The moment stretched, charged with possibility and the weight of a decision that would change everything. Then Sebastian's phone buzzed, shattering the intimacy, and they both stepped back, remembering where they were and what roles they still had to play for the next few days. I have a meeting in 10 minutes, he said, his voice returning to business mode even as his eyes remained soft. We should maintain professional distance until the transfer is official. No more private conversations. No more moments like this. Agreed. And Scarlett? Yes? Thank you for being brave enough to say yes. She smiled despite herself. Thank you for being decent enough to ask the right way. The next 3 days were exercises in restraint and professionalism that nearly killed them both. The transfer paperwork was processed with a speed that suggested Sebastian had pulled strings and called in favors to expedite what should have taken weeks. Jennifer Chen, Victoria's younger sister and head of acquisitions, greeted the news with raised eyebrows but professional acceptance, clearly understanding that questions would be both unwelcome and unwise. By Thursday afternoon, it was official. Scarlett Hayes no longer reported to Sebastian Wolf. She'd been transferred to acquisitions with a title bump to senior strategic analyst and a corner office that didn't quite match Sebastian's luxury but came close enough to signal that this wasn't a demotion. The office gossip was immediate and vicious. She heard the whispers in the break room, caught the speculative glances, endured the pointed questions disguised as friendly concern. The prevailing theory seemed to be that she'd either slept with Sebastian and been paid off with a promotion, or she'd threatened some kind of lawsuit and been transferred to avoid scandal. Neither was particularly flattering, but Scarlett had weathered worse storms, and she refused to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing her crack under the pressure of speculation and judgment. On Friday evening, she stood in front of her closet, staring at clothes that suddenly felt inadequate for a date with a man who owned half of Manhattan. Comfortable, he'd said, which ruled out the cocktail dresses but left her with limited options that didn't scream desperation or naivety. She settled on dark jeans, ankle boots, and a soft cream sweater that managed to be both casual and flattering. Her hair hung loose around her shoulders, makeup minimal, the whole effect suggesting someone who'd made an effort but wasn't trying too hard. 7 o'clock came with a knock on her apartment door. Sebastian stood in her hallway wearing jeans, actual jeans, dark and well-fitted, and a black button-down with the sleeves rolled to his forearms. No tie, no suit jacket, just Sebastian, looking younger and more relaxed than she'd ever seen him, holding a single white rose. "You look beautiful," he said simply, handing her the flower. "You look human," she replied, and his mouth curved into a genuine smile. I promise I'm working on it. The restaurant he'd chosen wasn't anywhere she'd expected. No five-star establishment in Manhattan, no place where they'd be recognized and photographed and added to the society pages. Instead, he drove them in his personal car, a sleek black Audi that probably cost more than her annual salary, but was blessedly understated, to a small Italian place in Brooklyn. The kind of neighborhood restaurant where the owners knew their regulars by name, where the menu was handwritten and changed daily, where the atmosphere was warm and genuine and completely unpretentious. "How did you find this place?" Scarlett asked as they were seated at a corner table that offered privacy without isolation. "My mother used to bring me here when I was a kid." Sebastian's expression grew distant, touched with memory. "Before she got sick, before everything fell apart. We'd come every Sunday after church, and she'd order the same thing every time: chicken, parmesan, and tiramisu. The owner's son runs it now, but the recipes are all the same." The vulnerability and the admission made Scarlett's chest tight. "Thank you for bringing me here. Thank you for saying yes to all of this." He reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers. "I know it's complicated. I know there are 100 reasons why this is risky and potentially disastrous, but I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since the moment you challenged me in that first interview." "You mean when I told you I wouldn't be a slave?" "I mean when you looked at me without fear or calculation or any of the masks people usually wear around me. You were just honest, blunt, yourself." His thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. It was refreshing, terrifying, and completely irresistible. Dinner arrived, rich pasta and wine that tasted like sunshine. And they talked, really talked, without the constraints of office hierarchy or professional obligations. Sebastian told her about growing up in Brooklyn, about a mother who'd worked 3 jobs to keep them housed and fed, about losing her and swearing he'd never be powerless again, about building his empire from nothing and crossing lines he couldn't uncross in the process. "I'm not a good man, Scarlett," he said quietly over dessert. "Tiramisu, just like his mother used to order. I've done things that would horrify you if you knew the details. Made deals with people who operate outside the law, hurt people who got in my way. I tell you this not to impress you or scare you, but because you deserve to know who I actually am before this goes any further." Scarlett set down her fork, meeting his gaze directly. "I'm not naive, Sebastian. I know your reputation. I've heard the rumors about what Wolf Industries really is and what you really control. And I'm making the choice to be here anyway, not because I think I can change you or redeem you, but because I see that you're capable of both darkness and surprising kindness. That complexity doesn't scare me. It should. Probably. But I've spent my whole life playing it safe, making responsible choices, doing everything right. And you know where it got me? Alone, exhausted, and drowning in medical debt. So maybe it's time I made an irresponsible choice for once." Sebastian's expression shifted into something fierce and possessive. "I'm your irresponsible choice?" "Apparently. I should probably object to that characterization. But you won't." "No," he admitted, a smile playing at his lips. "I won't." They left the restaurant near midnight, stepping into cool spring air that smelled like rain and possibility. Sebastian drove her home through quiet streets, one hand on the wheel and one holding hers across the console, the silence between them comfortable and charged all at once. When they reached her building, he walked her up again, a repeat of the night after the gala, but different now, weighted with intention and the knowledge of what they were building. At her door, Scarlett turned to face him, her back against the frame, looking up into eyes that had gone dark with want. "Thank you for tonight, for sharing that place with me, for being honest. Thank you for listening, for not running." "I'm not much of a runner." "No, you're not." His hand came up, fingers threading through her hair, tilting her face toward his. "You're stubborn and brave and entirely too good for someone like me. Let me be the judge of that." "Scarlett, kiss me, Sebastian. No more talking, no more thinking, just kiss me." So he did. This kiss was different from the first, less desperate, more certain, like they had all the time in the world to explore each other. His mouth moved against hers with controlled intensity, one hand cradling her face while the other splayed against the small of her back, pulling her closer. Scarlett's fingers twisted in his shirt, rising on her toes to meet him, losing herself in the taste of wine and tiramisu and something uniquely him. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Sebastian rested his forehead against hers. I should go. You should. Before I do something we're not ready for. Very responsible of you. I have my moments. He pressed one more kiss to her forehead, gentle and almost reverent. I'll call you tomorrow? You better. She watched him walk away, and this time when he looked back at the top of the stairs, his smile was unguarded and real. Inside her apartment, Eleanor was sitting up in bed, looking stronger than she had in weeks. The treatment was working, slowly, cautiously, but working nonetheless. That's the smile of a woman who just had a very good date, Eleanor observed. Scarlett sank onto the edge of the bed, still dizzy from kissing and possibility. It was perfect, Mom. He was perfect, which terrifies me. Why? Because men like Sebastian Wolf don't do perfect. They do complicated and dangerous and eventually devastating. Maybe, Eleanor agreed, or maybe he's exactly what you think he is, a man capable of both darkness and light, who's choosing to show you the light. And when the darkness comes back, then you decide if you're strong enough to stand beside him in it. Her mother took her hand, squeezing gently. But don't run from something good just because you're afraid it might turn bad, sweetheart. That's not living. That's just surviving. Scarlett spent the weekend in a haze of text messages and phone calls that lasted hours, learning Sebastian in fragments and moments. She discovered he was terrible at cooking but excellent at ordering takeout, that he read voraciously, philosophy, history, the kind of dense political theory that made her head hurt, that he'd been learning piano for the past year and still couldn't play a complete song without mistakes, that he had nightmares about his mother and woke at 3 a.m., more often than not. They went for coffee on Saturday afternoon, walked through Central Park while he told her about his plans to expand Wolf Industries into renewable energy, about wanting to build something legitimate that didn't require moral compromise. She told him about her dreams of finishing her graduate degree someday, about wanting to write a book, about small ambitions that felt enormous when voiced aloud. You should do it, Sebastian said as they sat on a bench watching boats on the lake. The degree, the book, all of it. It's expensive, and I don't have time with Mom's treatment and work. What if those weren't obstacles? What if you had the resources and the time? Sebastian, you can't just... I'm not offering charity, Scarlett. I'm asking a hypothetical question. If those barriers didn't exist, would you pursue those dreams? Of course, but that's not reality. Reality is negotiable when you have enough money and determination. He turned to face her, serious and intent. I meant what I said about wanting to build something legitimate, something good. I could use someone smart and honest to help me figure out how to do that without losing everything I've already built. You're offering me a job? I'm offering you a partnership, eventually, when you're ready. After you finish that degree and write that book and become everything you're capable of being. The enormity of what he was suggesting stole her breath. Why would you do that? Because I see what you could become, Scarlett, and I want to be there when you do. She kissed him then, there on a park bench in the middle of the afternoon, not caring who saw or what anyone thought. Sunday night arrived too quickly, reality reasserting itself with the approach of Monday and separate work schedules and the need to maintain professional distance despite everything changing between them personally. Scarlett was in her new office early Monday morning, reviewing acquisition files and pretending she wasn't acutely aware of Sebastian's presence 2 floors up when her phone buzzed with a text. Sebastian, dinner tonight? My place. I'll cook, or attempt to cook. Probably order takeout when I inevitably fail. She smiled despite herself, typing back, You had me at attempt to cook. What time? Sebastian. 7. I'll send a car. Scarlett. I can take the subway. Sebastian. You could, but the car will be waiting anyway. Humor me. The day crawled past with meetings and financial models and the steep learning curve of a new position that would have been overwhelming if she weren't so distracted by anticipation. Jennifer Chen proved to be an excellent supervisor, demanding but fair, brilliant with numbers, and mercifully incurious about Scarlett's relationship with Sebastian. At 6:30, she left the office and found the car waiting exactly as promised. Sebastian's penthouse was in a building she'd seen 100 times but never entered, the kind of exclusive address that came with doormen who looked like Secret Service agents and lobbies that resembled museum installations. The elevator required a key to access the top floor, and when the doors opened, she stepped directly into his apartment. Calling it an apartment was like calling the ocean damp. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered 360-degree views of Manhattan, the city spread out like a kingdom beneath them. The decor was minimalist but warm. Dark woods, leather, art that was probably worth more than her building. Everything spoke of wealth refined by taste and restrained by someone who understood that true luxury was subtle. And in the kitchen, open concept and gleaming with appliances that looked untouched, Sebastian stood wearing an apron over his dress shirt and slacks, looking at ingredients spread across the counter with the expression of a general surveying a particularly challenging battlefield. "I'm in over my head," he admitted when he saw her. The recipe said simple pasta carbonara. It lied. Scarlett laughed, setting down her bag and crossing to him. "Let me help before you burn down your very expensive kitchen. I knew there was a reason I invited you over." They cooked together, or rather, Scarlett cooked, while Sebastian followed instructions with the kind of intense focus he usually reserved for hostile takeovers. The carbonara turned out surprisingly edible, and they ate at his dining table while the sun set over the city, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. "Tell me something true," Sebastian said over wine that probably cost more than her monthly rent. "Something you've never told anyone else." Scarlett considered the request, weighing vulnerability against the growing trust between them. "I'm terrified of becoming my mother," she said finally. "Not the cancer part. The part where she gave up everything for my father, her career, her dreams, her identity, and then he left anyway when things got hard. She spent 20 years building her life around someone who didn't deserve it, and I swore I'd never do the same, that I'd never need anyone that much. And now? Now I'm sitting in a penthouse with a billionaire who's restructured my entire career and paid for my mother's treatment. And I'm realizing that maybe I already need you more than I'm comfortable with." Sebastian reached across the table, capturing her hand. "For what it's worth, the feeling is entirely mutual. I've spent 15 years building walls between myself and everyone else, and you walk through them like they didn't exist. Is that good or bad? I haven't decided yet." His thumb traced patterns on her palm. "But I'm willing to find out." They moved to the living room after dinner, settling on a couch that probably cost more than a car, while Manhattan glittered beneath them. Sebastian put on music, jazz, soft and instrumental, and pulled Scarlett against his side with the kind of casual intimacy that felt simultaneously new and inevitable. "Stay," he said quietly. "Tonight. No expectations, no pressure. Just stay." "Sebastian, there are 4 guest rooms. You can have your pick. I just want you here." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "I sleep better knowing you're close." It should have felt rushed, too soon, a step too far, too fast. Instead, it felt right. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll stay." That night, Scarlett lay in a guest room that was bigger than her entire apartment, wrapped in sheets that felt like silk, staring at a ceiling she couldn't see in the darkness. Down the hall, Sebastian was doing the same, both of them hyper-aware of the other's presence, both wondering what they were building and whether it could possibly last. Her phone buzzed with a text. "Sebastian, still awake?" "Scarlett, can't sleep in beds this comfortable. I'm not used to luxury." "Sebastian, you should be. You deserve it." "Scarlett, sweet talker." "Sebastian, honest talker. There's a difference." She smiled in the darkness, typing back, "Thank you for tonight, for all of this." "Sebastian, thank you for taking a chance on someone who doesn't deserve it." "Scarlett, let me be the judge of that." Sebastian, "Good night, Scarlett. Sweet dreams." Scarlett, "Good night, Sebastian." She fell asleep with her phone still in her hand, dreaming of possibility and dangerous men with surprising gentleness, unaware that everything was about to change. Because in the shadows of Sebastian's empire, something was moving, someone who knew his secrets, and who was about to use Scarlett to destroy everything he'd built. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered to Scarlett's office by courier instead of through normal corporate mail channels. Plain Manila. No return address. Just her name typed across the front in letters that felt vaguely menacing despite their mundane appearance. She'd been at Wolf Industries for 3 months now, settled into acquisitions with the kind of competence that earned Jennifer's respect and her colleagues' grudging acceptance. The gossip about her relationship with Sebastian had faded to background noise, replaced by newer scandals and speculations that had nothing to do with her. Life had found a rhythm. Work during the day, stolen moments with Sebastian in the evenings, weekends split between visiting her mother at Johns Hopkins and staying at his penthouse. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs, built on honesty and growing trust and the kind of connection that made her believe in possibilities she'd stopped dreaming about years ago. The envelope shattered that carefully constructed piece. Inside were photographs, dozens of them, printed on glossy paper with professional clarity that made every detail painfully sharp. Sebastian in what looked like an abandoned warehouse, surrounded by men whose faces she didn't recognize, but whose postures screamed violence and criminality. Sebastian exchanging briefcases with someone whose face was deliberately obscured. Sebastian in conversation with a man she did recognize, Victor Constantine, a name that appeared in federal investigations and organized crime reports with alarming regularity. But it was the final photograph that made her blood run cold. Sebastian standing in what appeared to be a private office, pointing to documents spread across a desk. And there, clearly visible in the photograph, was her employee file. Her photograph, her personal information, her mother's medical records. Beneath the photographs was a single typed note. He's been using you from the beginning. Eleanor Hayes wasn't chosen for the clinical trial by chance. Ask him about Victor Constantine. Ask him what he promised in exchange for your mother's treatment. Ask him what you really mean to him. Scarlett's hands shook as she gathered the photographs, shoving them back into the envelope with movements that bordered on violent. Her mind raced through implications and denials, trying to construct a reality where this wasn't what it looked like, where there was some reasonable explanation for why Sebastian would have her file displayed during a meeting with a known criminal. She couldn't find one. Her phone buzzed with a text from Sebastian. "Lunch today? I'm between meetings at 1. The casual normalcy of it made her stomach turn. She typed back with fingers that felt numb. "We need to talk. Your office, Yao. Now." The response came immediately. "Everything okay?" Scarlett didn't answer, just grabbed the envelope and walked out of her office with the kind of focused intensity that made her assistant wisely stay silent. The elevator ride to Sebastian's floor felt endless. She bypassed Victoria's desk without acknowledging the older woman's startled greeting, pushed through the frosted glass doors, and found Sebastian exactly where she'd expected, behind his desk, on the phone, looking every inch the powerful executive who controlled empires with a word. He saw her face and immediately ended the call. "Scarlett, what's wrong?" She threw the envelope onto his desk. Photographs spilled across the polished surface, a damning spread of evidence and implications. Sebastian went very still, his eyes scanning the images with an expression that shifted from confusion to recognition to something that looked like resignation and fury combined. "Where did you get these?" "They were delivered to my office an hour ago. Anonymous courier." Her voice shook despite her efforts to control it. "Tell me they're fake. Tell me this is someone trying to sabotage you with doctored photographs and I'll believe you. Please." Sebastian picked up one of the photos, the one with her file visible, and his jaw tightened. "They're real." The confirmation hit like a physical blow. "The meeting with Constantine happened 3 months ago, before we started dating, before I even knew I was going to offer you the job. That doesn't explain why my file was there, why my mother's medical information was being discussed with a criminal. Because Constantine controls the pharmaceutical company that manufactures the drug being used in your mother's trial." Sebastian's voice was flat, emotionless in the way it got when he was exercising maximum control. The trial had a waiting list 6 months long. Getting Eleanor accepted required intervention from someone with leverage over the approval process. "You made a deal with a mobster to get my mother into the trial?" "I made a deal to save her life." "What kind of deal?" The question came out as barely more than a whisper. "What did you promise him, Sebastian?" "Information. Access to certain shipping routes his organization needed for their pharmaceutical distribution network. Nothing that would endanger anyone. Nothing illegal in the strictest sense, but enough to give him what he wanted in exchange for what I needed. Scarlett felt the world tilting beneath her feet. You used my mother as leverage for a business arrangement with organized crime? No. Sebastian stood, moving around the desk with controlled urgency. I used my connections to help someone I cared about. The fact that it required negotiation with Constantine was unfortunate but necessary. When did you decide you cared about me, Sebastian? Before or after you realized I could be useful? That's not fair. Fair. Her voice rose despite her best efforts. You want to talk about fair? You pursued me, restructured my entire career, made me believe this was real, and the whole time you were playing some kind of long game with a mobster using my mother's life as a bargaining chip. That is not what happened. His voice turned sharp, commanding. I didn't pursue you because of Constantine. I didn't restructure your career because of some elaborate scheme. I did those things because I wanted you, Scarlett. The deal with Constantine was separate. Nothing with you is separate. Everything is calculated and strategic and designed to serve whatever master plan you're running. She grabbed one of the photographs, holding it up. This is dated 2 weeks after I started. You already knew me, already had access to my files. And you still went to a meeting with a criminal and put my information on display like I was some kind of asset to be traded. Sebastian's expression darkened. I was protecting you, making sure Constantine understood you were off limits, that your mother's treatment would continue regardless of what happened between his organization and mine. You were treating me like property, like something you owned and needed to secure. I was ensuring that you wouldn't become collateral damage in a world you don't understand. His control finally cracked, frustration and anger bleeding through. Do you have any idea how many people would use you to get to me if they knew what you meant to me? How many threats I've neutralized in the past 3 months just to keep you safe? I didn't ask for that. I didn't ask to be part of your criminal empire or your protection schemes or whatever the hell this is. You asked to be with me. This is what that means. The words hung between them, brutal in their honesty. Scarlett felt tears burning behind her eyes but refused to let them fall. Who sent these photographs, Sebastian? I don't know, but I intend to find out. That's not good enough. She gathered the photographs with shaking hands, shoving them back into the envelope. I need time. I need space to think about what this means and whether I can live with it. Scarlett, please, don't. She held up a hand, stopping him from coming closer. Don't make promises you can't keep. Don't tell me this isn't what it looks like when we both know it absolutely is. You made a deal with the criminal using my mother as leverage, and regardless of your intentions, that's a violation of trust I don't know how to forgive. I would do it again. His voice was quiet but absolute. If it meant saving Eleanor, if it meant keeping you safe, I would make the same deal 100 times over without hesitation. I know, that's what terrifies me. She walked out before he could respond, leaving Sebastian standing alone in his office, surrounded by photographs that exposed truths he'd hoped would stay buried. The next 3 days were a special kind of hell. Scarlett threw herself into work with manic intensity, staying late and arriving early, filling every moment with tasks and analysis so she didn't have to think about Sebastian or mobsters or the reality that the man she'd fallen for operated in a world where love and leverage were apparently interchangeable concepts. Her phone buzzed constantly with texts from Sebastian that she ignored. Flowers arrived at her office, white roses, her favorite, with cards that said things like, "Please talk to me, and I'm sorry, and this isn't how I wanted you to find out." She threw them away. Eleanor, now well enough to make phone calls from Johns Hopkins, tried to mediate when Scarlett visited that weekend. "You're being too hard on him, sweetheart. He made a deal with a criminal, Mom, using you as a bargaining chip. He saved my life." Eleanor's voice was gentle but firm. "Whatever his methods, whatever deals he had to make, the result is that I'm alive and getting better. That matters. But at what cost? How can I trust him knowing he operates like this? Knowing that everything, even us, might be part of some larger strategy I don't understand. You trust him by deciding that who he is now matters more than what he had to do to survive becoming that person." Her mother reached out, taking Scarlett's hand. "Men like Sebastian Wolf don't come from privilege and safety, honey. They come from places where you make impossible choices or you don't survive. Yes, he deals with dangerous people. Yes, he operates in moral gray areas. But he also chose to use that dangerous world to help us when he didn't have to. He had an agenda. He had feelings. For you. And instead of pretending he was someone safer or simpler, he used his actual resources, however problematic, to help the person you love most. That's not manipulation, Scarlett. That's just love expressed by someone who doesn't know how to do it conventionally. The words settled into Scarlett's chest, uncomfortable and true. On Thursday evening, the second envelope arrived. This time it was delivered to her apartment, slipped under the door while she was visiting her mother. Same manila color, same typed label, same sense of menace. Inside was a single photograph and a note. The photograph showed Sebastian and Scarlett at the Italian restaurant in Brooklyn, the night of their first date, clearly taken through the window from across the street. They were laughing, his hand covering hers on the table, both of them looking at each other with expressions that made Scarlett's chest ache to see. The note was brief. He loves you. That makes you a weakness. Victor Constantine sends his regards and a warning. Sebastian Wolf has something that belongs to him, and he'll take something of Sebastian's in return. Leave now, or become collateral damage in a war you didn't choose. Scarlett's hands shook as she read it twice, then 3 times, the implications crashing over her in waves. This wasn't just about exposing Sebastian's dealings. This was an active threat against her. She grabbed her phone and, for the first time in 3 days, called Sebastian. He answered on the first ring. Scarlett, I need you to come to my apartment, now. Don't ask questions, just come. I'm on my way. He arrived in less than 20 minutes, still in his suit from work, looking like he'd run several red lights to get there. His eyes found hers immediately, searching for injury or fear or any sign of what emergency had made her finally break her silence. Scarlett handed him the envelope without speaking. Sebastian read the note, his expression transforming from concern to cold fury in the span of seconds. When he looked up, his eyes were storm gray and deadly. How long ago was this delivered? Less than an hour. I found it when I got home from the hospital. Pack a bag. You're leaving here tonight. Sebastian, this isn't a debate, Scarlett. Constantine doesn't make idle threats, and if he's targeting you directly, this building isn't safe. He pulled out his phone, already dialing. Marcus, I need a security team at Miss Hayes' apartment in 15 minutes. Full detail. And have the penthouse prepared for an extended stay. I'm not moving into your penthouse like some protected witness. Sebastian lowered the phone, his expression absolutely implacable. Yes, you are. Because the alternative is that you stay here and become a target for a man who kills people for sport when he's bored and for profit when he's motivated. Right now, you're both. This is exactly what I was talking about. You making decisions for me without my consent because you think you know better. I do know better about this. He crossed to her, gripping her shoulders with gentle intensity. I know how Constantine operates. I know what he's capable of. And I know that if anything happened to you because I didn't protect you, I would burn down half the city to get revenge, and it still wouldn't be enough. The raw honesty in his voice cut through her anger. What does Constantine want? What do you have that belongs to him? Information. Evidence of his organization's operations that I acquired during a previous business arrangement. I was supposed to destroy it after our deal concluded. I didn't. Why not? Because men like Constantine can't be trusted, and insurance is the only thing that keeps them from deciding you're more valuable dead than alive. Sebastian's jaw tightened. I've kept that information secure for 3 months. He clearly just figured out I still have it. So give it to him. I can't. The moment I hand over that leverage, nothing stops him from coming after me or anyone I care about with impunity. Then we're trapped. He wants something you can't give him, and he's using me to force your hand. No. Sebastian's voice turned absolutely certain. We end this. Tonight. But I need you somewhere safe while I handle it. Scarlett wanted to argue, wanted to maintain her independence and refused to be sequestered like some damsel who needed rescuing. But the photograph of them at dinner, the proof that Constantine had been watching long enough to know exactly how much she mattered to Sebastian, killed any illusion that she could simply opt out of this situation. Fine, I'll stay at your penthouse. But Sebastian, I need you to be honest with me about something. Anything. The deal you made for my mother's treatment, was getting close to me part of it? Even peripherally? He looked at her for a long moment, and she saw him weighing truth against comfort, honesty against the desire to give her an easier answer. No, the deal was strictly about Eleanor's enrollment in the trial. Constantine never mentioned you specifically because at that point you were just my assistant. I hadn't pursued you yet, hadn't restructured your position. The timing was coincidental, but I swear to you, Scarlett, you were never part of any arrangement with him. But he knew about me, about us. This photograph proves that. Because I'm surveilled constantly by half a dozen different organizations who want leverage over me. Constantine's people watching me is standard practice. Them seeing us together and him deciding to use you against me is opportunistic, not premeditated. That doesn't make it better. I know, but it's the truth. Scarlett searched his face, looking for any sign of deception or calculation, found only grim honesty and the kind of controlled fear that came from a man who'd just realized something he valued was in danger. Okay, she said finally, I'll pack a bag. But Sebastian, when this is over, when Constantine is handled and I'm not actively being threatened, we need to have a serious conversation about what it means to be with someone who operates in your world. I know, because I can't keep being blindsided by photographs and threats and revelations about deals with criminals. If we're going to make this work, I need full transparency, no more protection through ignorance. Agreed. He pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her forehead. I'm sorry for all of this, for not telling you about Constantine earlier, for putting you in this position. Just keep me alive so I can yell at you properly when this is over. His mouth curved slightly. Deal. 20 minutes later, Scarlett was in Sebastian's car with a bag of hastily packed clothes, watching her apartment building recede in the rear-view mirror while two security vehicles followed at a discreet distance. The penthouse awaited, luxurious and secure, and increasingly feeling like a gilded cage. Sebastian made calls the entire drive, his voice clipped and commanding as he orchestrated whatever plan he'd formulated to handle Constantine. Scarlett caught fragments, something about a meeting, neutral territory, evidence exchange, but he kept the details vague, probably for her benefit. When they arrived at his building, the security presence was immediate and obvious. Men in suits who moved with military precision, scanning the street and lobby before allowing them to enter. The elevator ride was silent, tension crackling between them. Inside the penthouse, Sebastian finally set down his phone and turned to face her. I need to meet with Constantine tonight. Neutral location. His people in mind. We're going to negotiate terms. What kind of terms? He gets his information back. I get assurances that you're untouchable, that this ends without bloodshed. And if he doesn't agree? Sebastian's expression went cold and dangerous. Then I'll handle it another way. But I'm trying to avoid that option because it's messy and permanent and would require explanations I'd prefer not to give federal investigators. You're talking about killing him. I'm talking about protecting what's mine. His voice softened slightly. Which includes you, whether you like the possessive phrasing or not. Scarlett should have been horrified, should have recoiled from the casual way he discussed violence and murder as viable problem-solving options. Instead, she felt a complicated tangle of fear and gratitude and the reluctant understanding that this was who Sebastian fundamentally was, someone who protected his people with absolute ruthlessness when necessary. How long will you be gone? 2 hours, maybe 3. He crossed to her, cupping her face in his hands. Marcus and his team will be stationed outside. The penthouse has a panic room off the master bedroom if anything goes wrong. But nothing will go wrong, Scarlett. I promise you. Don't make promises you can't keep. Then I'll rephrase. I will do everything in my power to ensure nothing goes wrong, and my power is considerable. He kissed her then, deep and desperate, like he was trying to memorize the taste of her in case this went sideways and he didn't come back. When he pulled away, his eyes were dark with emotion. I love you. I should have said it before now. Should have told you weeks ago. But I love you, Scarlett Hayes, and I will move heaven and earth to keep you safe. The words hit her like a freight train, stealing her breath and any coherent response. Sebastian didn't wait for her to recover, just grabbed his jacket and walked toward the elevator, moving with the controlled purpose of someone heading into battle. The penthouse door closed behind him with a soft click, and Scarlett stood there alone, surrounded by luxury and security, hearing 3 words echoing in her mind that changed absolutely everything. She moved to the windows, watching the city lights blur through tears she couldn't quite explain. Fear for Sebastian's safety, anger at the situation, love, because despite everything, despite the danger and the moral complications and the photographs that exposed truths she'd never wanted to know, she loved him too, which made her exactly what Eleanor had warned her about years ago, a woman whose heart had led her somewhere her head knew was dangerous. The hours crawled past with agonizing slowness. Scarlett tried to read, to watch television, to do anything except imagine all the ways a meeting with a mobster could go catastrophically wrong. Marcus checked in every 30 minutes via the intercom, his voice calm and professional, offering reassurance she didn't quite believe. At 11:43, the elevator chimed. Scarlett's heart leaped into her throat as the doors opened, every muscle tensed for whatever came next. Sebastian stepped out, looking exhausted and furious but alive. Whole. Safe. She crossed the room in a run, throwing herself into his arms with enough force to make him stumble backward. He caught her automatically, his hands coming up to cradle her against him while she verified through touch what her eyes already confirmed. He was really here, really okay, really back. "It's done," he murmured against her hair. "Constantine has his information. You have ironclad protection. It's over." Just like that? Just like that. He got what he wanted. I got assurances that carry the weight of his entire organization. We both walk away. Scarlett pulled back just enough to see his face. "What did you give him, beyond the evidence?" "A favor. To be called in at a time of his choosing. Nothing that will endanger innocence or cross lines I can't uncross, but enough to make the deal worthwhile from his perspective." "Sebastian, you just put yourself in debt to a mobster. I put myself in debt to keep you alive. I'd do it 1,000 times over without hesitation." His hands framed her face, thumbs brushing away tears she hadn't realized she was crying. "You matter more than leverage, Scarlett. More than pride or power or staying free of obligations. That's what tonight taught me." "I love you too." The words tumbled out before she could stop them. "I'm furious with you and terrified by your world and absolutely sure this is going to be complicated and difficult, but I love you anyway, despite my better judgment and every rational thought telling me to run." Sebastian's expression transformed into something raw and vulnerable. "Say it again." "I love you, Sebastian Wolf. You impossible, dangerous, surprisingly tender man." He kissed her like she was oxygen, and he'd been drowning, like the past 3 days of silence and the evening of negotiations had tested limits he hadn't known he possessed. Scarlett kissed him back with equal intensity, pouring 3 days of fear and frustration and reluctant understanding into the connection between them. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Sebastian rested his forehead against hers. "Move in with me. Officially. Not just staying here because of threats, but actually living here because you want to. That's moving really fast. We've been doing everything fast since the moment you challenged me in that first interview. Why stop now?" "Because fast leads to crashes. Or it leads to something worth the risk." His voice dropped, intimate and certain. "I want you here, Scarlett. I want to wake up next to you and come home to you and build something real that doesn't involve crisis or danger forcing us together." She should have said no. Should have insisted on maintaining her apartment and her independence and some semblance of a life that existed separate from Sebastian and his complicated world. Instead, she heard herself say, "Okay, but I'm keeping my apartment as backup for when you inevitably do something that makes me need space." "Fair enough?" He smiled, genuine and warm and so different from the cold executive she'd first met. "I'll take what I can get." They moved to the bedroom eventually, exhaustion and emotion catching up with both of them. Sebastian held her close, one hand tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder while Manhattan glittered beyond the windows. "Tell me something true," Scarlett whispered into the darkness. "Something you've never told anyone else." "I was terrified tonight. During the meeting with Constantine, not of him or his threats, but of the possibility that I might have to choose between keeping you safe and maintaining the power I've spent 15 years building. And I realized that if it came down to it, I'd burn my entire empire to the ground rather than lose you." The confession settled into her chest, warm and terrible, and absolutely honest. That's either the most romantic thing anyone's ever said to me or the most terrifying. Can it be both? With you, it usually is. He pressed a kiss to her temple, and she felt him smile against her skin. They fell asleep tangled together, two people who'd found each other through impossible circumstances and chosen to stay despite every rational reason to run. Outside, the city hummed with life and danger and possibilities neither of them could predict. But in that moment, wrapped in expensive sheets in each other's arms, they were simply Sebastian and Scarlett, two people learning what it meant to love someone despite the complications, to trust despite the fear, and to build something real in a world that didn't believe in happy endings. The war with Constantine was over. The real work of learning to be together was just beginning, and neither of them had any idea what came next. 3 weeks of cautious peace followed the meeting with Constantine, and Scarlett began to believe that maybe, just maybe, they'd actually escape the worst of it. She moved into the penthouse gradually, bringing boxes of belongings that looked almost comical against Sebastian's minimalist luxury. He made space for her things with an attentiveness that surprised her, clearing closet space, rearranging bookshelves, installing a reading chair by the windows, because he'd noticed she liked natural light when she read. Work settled into a new rhythm. Jennifer proved to be an excellent mentor, and the acquisitions division thrived under projects Scarlett spearheaded with increasing confidence. She and Sebastian maintained professional distance at the office, but everyone knew anyway. The gossip had evolved from scandalous to almost boring. They were just another couple navigating workplace romance, nothing to see here. Eleanor's treatment continued with remarkable success. The experimental drug was working better than anyone had dared hope, her scans showing progressive improvement that had her oncologist cautiously using words like remission and recovery. She'd been moved to outpatient care, staying in a comfortable apartment near Johns Hopkins that Sebastian had arranged without asking, just handled like he handled everything that mattered to Scarlett. Life felt almost normal, almost safe, which should have been Scarlett's first warning that something was wrong. The call came on a Friday afternoon while she was reviewing merger documents. Sebastian's personal line, which he never used during business hours unless it was urgent. "Can you come up to my office? Now." His voice was controlled but tight, the tone he used when containing emotions that threatened to overwhelm his usual composure. Scarlett's stomach dropped. "What's wrong? Just come. Please." She found him standing at his windows, hands in his pockets, staring out at the city with the kind of stillness that preceded either violence or complete emotional shutdown. On his desk lay a tablet displaying what looked like a news article. "Sebastian, what happened?" "Victor Constantine is dead, killed last night in what police are calling a targeted hit. 3 bullets, execution style, outside a restaurant in Brighton Beach." Scarlett's mind raced through implications. "You didn't know." He turned to face her, and his expression was grim. "I didn't order it. Didn't want it. Had nothing to do with it. But someone made it look like I did." "How?" Sebastian picked up the tablet, pulling up additional screens. Security footage, grainy but clear enough, showing men in suits entering the restaurant where Constantine had been dining. Men whose builds and movements matched Sebastian's personal security team. A black car identical to the ones Wolf Industries used pulling away from the scene. "These men don't work for me. The car isn't ours. Wrong license plates, different configuration. But it's close enough that anyone investigating will draw conclusions. Someone's framing you for murder. Someone's starting a war." His voice went cold, analytical. "Constantine's organization will demand blood for this. They won't care about evidence or truth. They'll care that their leader is dead and someone needs to pay. And right now, all signs point to me." Scarlett felt ice spreading through her veins. "What do we do?" "We figure out who actually ordered the hit before Constantine's people come after me, which gives us maybe 48 hours before this escalates beyond control." The next 2 days were a masterclass in controlled chaos and strategic investigation that revealed exactly how deep Sebastian's connections ran and how dangerous his world truly was. He called in favors from people Scarlett had only read about in newspapers, federal prosecutors who owed him for past assistance, private investigators with security clearances that shouldn't exist, tech experts who could trace digital footprints through networks most people didn't know existed. The penthouse became a war room. Scarlett watched Sebastian transform from the man who held her gently at night into someone utterly ruthless, moving pieces across a chessboard she couldn't fully see, making calls in languages she didn't speak, orchestrating responses to threats she barely understood. "Tell me how I can help," she said Saturday evening, watching him review surveillance footage for the 100th time. "You can stay safe. That's how you help." "That's not good enough. I'm not some fragile thing that needs protecting while you handle everything alone." Sebastian looked up, exhaustion evident in the lines around his eyes. "Scarlett, I know you're used to operating solo. I know you think keeping me separate from this protects me, but we're past that now. I'm already involved. So either tell me what you need or accept that I'm going to start investigating on my own and probably make mistakes that put us both in danger." A smile flickered across his face, despite the circumstances. "You're stubborn. You're evasive. We both have our flaws." She moved to his side, studying the screens. "What are you looking for?" "Anything that doesn't fit. The hit was too clean, too professional. Constantine's own security should have prevented it, but 3 of his guards were conveniently absent that night. Someone on the inside helped arrange this. Who benefits from Constantine dying and you taking the blame? That's the question." Sebastian pulled up a list of names. Other criminal organizations, business rivals, political enemies. Constantine had plenty of people who wanted him dead. I have plenty of people who'd love to see me destroyed. The overlap is where we'll find our answer. They worked through the night, cross-referencing names and connections, building a web of relationships and grudges and business arrangements that painted a picture of the underworld. Sebastian navigated with practiced ease. At 3 a.m., Scarlett found it. "Sebastian, look at this." She pulled up financial records that one of his investigators had acquired through methods she definitely didn't want to know about. Constantine's second-in-command, Dmitry Volkov. He made 3 large deposits into an offshore account 2 weeks ago. Same timing as when the surveillance on us started. Sebastian leaned in, scanning the information with laser focus. Volkov was supposed to inherit Constantine's organization, but there were rumors he was getting impatient, that Constantine was planning to pass leadership to someone else. So Volkov kills his boss, frames you to eliminate a powerful rival, and takes over the organization while everyone's focused on revenge. It's elegant, ruthless, exactly the kind of move someone ambitious enough would make. Sebastian pulled out his phone, already dialing. "I need to get this to Constantine's people before they come after me. If they know Volkov ordered the hit, their attention shifts to internal justice." "Will they believe you?" "They will when I provide proof that Volkov's been skimming from organizational funds for 6 months. I had the information as insurance against Constantine, but it works just as well against his successor." He made the call in Russian, his voice hard and commanding. Scarlett couldn't understand the words, but she understood the tone. This was Sebastian at his most dangerous, wielding information like a weapon and changing the trajectory of a gang war with a single conversation. When he hung up, some of the tension had left his shoulders. "They're handling Volkov internally. We're clear. Just like that?" "Just like that." He pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "You found the connection. You potentially just saved both our lives. I just read financial statements. You did the rest. Don't diminish what you contributed. You saw what I missed because you weren't looking at it through the lens of someone who's been navigating this world for 15 years. Fresh eyes matter, Scarlett." She leaned into him, feeling the steady beat of his heart, the warmth of him anchoring her after 48 hours of fear and investigation. "Is it always like this? Crisis and danger and last-minute saves? No, most of the time it's boring business meetings and contract negotiations and trying to build something legitimate out of foundations that aren't." He tilted her face up to meet his eyes. "But yes, sometimes it's exactly like this. And I need you to decide if you can live with that reality." "I already decided. I'm still here, aren't I?" "Being here during a crisis is different from choosing this life long term." Scarlett pulled back slightly, studying his face. "What are you really asking me, Sebastian?" He was quiet for a long moment, and she watched him struggle with vulnerability and the need to protect himself from rejection. Then, "I'm asking if you'll marry me. Not now, not today, but eventually. I'm asking if you can see a future where you're not just living with me temporarily, but building a life with me permanently, knowing what that life entails. The question stole her breath. That's not a proposal. That's a theoretical discussion about potential future proposals. Because I need to know if I should actually propose. If there's a world where you'd say yes before I put myself in a position to hear no. You face down mobsters and corporate raiders and federal investigators, but you're afraid to actually ask me to marry you? Terrified, actually. His voice went rough with honesty. Because I can handle business failures and criminal threats and every other danger in my world. But I can't handle you saying no. Not to this. Not when you're the only thing I've ever wanted that I didn't build or take or manipulate into existence. Scarlett's throat tightened with emotion. This man who controlled empires and negotiated with criminals and moved through the world like he owned it was standing in front of her completely vulnerable, asking for something he couldn't simply take. Ask me properly, she whispered. Not theoretically. Ask me for real. Sebastian's eyes widened slightly. Then he did something she never expected. He dropped to one knee right there in his war room, surrounded by surveillance footage and financial records, and evidence of the dangerous world he inhabited. Scarlett Hayes. His voice shook slightly, betraying nerves that never showed anywhere else. I love you. I've loved you since you told me I was insufferable in our first meeting. You make me want to be better than I am, to build something worth your respect, to prove that someone like me can deserve someone like you. I can't promise you safe or simple or anything resembling normal, but I can promise you honest. I can promise you partnership. I can promise you that I will spend every day trying to be worthy of the trust you've placed in me. Will you marry me? You don't have a ring. I have 3, actually, in the safe. Couldn't decide which one you'd like best. He smiled despite his obvious nervousness. Seemed presumptuous to choose without knowing if you'd even say yes. 3 rings suggests you were pretty confident. 3 rings suggests I was desperately hopeful and covering all possible stylistic preferences. Scarlett laughed through tears she hadn't realized were falling. Show me the rings. Sebastian stood, moving to a safe hidden behind a painting, his hands actually shaking slightly as he entered the combination. He pulled out 3 small boxes, setting them on the desk with the kind of care usually reserved for explosives. The first was a classic solitaire, brilliant and traditional. The second was vintage Art Deco, intricate and elegant. The third was modern, a sapphire surrounded by diamonds that caught the light and held it. The solitaire is safe, traditional. Exactly what people would expect. Sebastian's voice steadied as he moved into explanation mode. The Art Deco is unique, has history, shows thoughtfulness. The sapphire is unconventional, bold, matches your eyes, and suggests I actually paid attention to details instead of just buying the biggest diamond. You overthought this. Catastrophically. He met her eyes. Which one would you choose? Assuming you're saying yes, which I'm still not sure about, and now deeply regretting asking before securing an answer. Scarlett picked up the sapphire ring, watching light dance across the stone. It was beautiful and unexpected and absolutely perfect. This one. And yes. Yes, you like the ring, or yes, you'll marry me. Both, you impossible man. She held out her hand and Sebastian's fingers trembled slightly as he slid the ring onto her finger. Yes, I'll marry you. Yes, I'll build a life with you knowing it will be complicated and occasionally dangerous and nothing like the safe future I once imagined. Yes to all of it. Sebastian pulled her close, kissing her with a depth of emotion that took her breath away. When they finally broke apart, he was smiling, genuinely, unguardedly happy in a way she'd never seen. I was prepared for a much longer negotiation. I'm full of surprises. You are the surprise, Scarlett, every single day. They stood there holding each other while dawn broke over Manhattan, 2 people who'd found something real in the middle of chaos and chosen to keep it despite every complication. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of change that transformed both their lives in ways neither could have predicted. Sebastian made good on his promise to build something legitimate. He began systematically restructuring Wolf Industries, divesting from questionable partnerships, cutting ties with organizations that operated in moral gray areas, using his considerable resources to create distance between his public business and his private past. It wasn't easy. People he'd worked with for years pushed back. Deals fell through. Profits dipped slightly as he prioritized ethics over expedience. But Sebastian navigated it all with the same ruthless efficiency he'd once used for less noble purposes, redirecting his considerable talents toward building an empire he could be proud of. Scarlett watched him transform, saw the man who'd negotiated with criminals slowly become someone who could stand in boardrooms and justify his decisions without moral compromise. It wasn't complete redemption. Some things couldn't be undone, some choices couldn't be unmade, but it was genuine change motivated by the desire to become someone worthy of the future they were building. She changed too. The graduate program she'd once thought impossible became reality when Sebastian quietly paid her tuition and arranged her schedule to accommodate classes. She protested initially, but he'd simply said, "Consider it an investment in my future wife's education," and refused to discuss it further. The book she dreamed of writing started taking shape during late nights and weekends, a project about women navigating corporate power structures that drew heavily from her own experience. Sebastian read early drafts and provided feedback that was both brutally honest and surprisingly insightful. Eleanor went into full remission 6 months after the engagement. The experimental treatment had worked beyond anyone's expectations, and her oncologist declared her cancer-free with the kind of cautious optimism that suggested he actually believed it would last. She moved back to New York into an apartment near the penthouse that Sebastian had purchased without asking, just handled because that was how he showed love. Through action rather than words. The wedding was planned for the following spring, a year after Sebastian's proposal. Small, intimate, just family and close friends rather than the society spectacle people expected from someone of Sebastian's wealth and status. But before they could reach that moment, one final test arrived. It came in the form of a federal investigation into Wolf Industries' past dealings, specifically focusing on the company's connections to Victor Constantine's pharmaceutical operations. The prosecutor leading the case was ambitious, media-savvy, and determined to make an example of someone powerful. Sebastian was the perfect target. "They want me to testify against you," Scarlett said quietly one evening, sitting across from Sebastian in their living room while lawyers' documents spread across the coffee table. "To provide evidence about the deal you made for my mother's treatment. They think it's proof of criminal conspiracy." Sebastian went very still, his expression carefully neutral. "What did you tell them?" "That I needed to speak with my attorney before making any statements." "Smart." He set down the brief he'd been reading. "You should testify, Scarlett. Tell them the truth. Don't perjure yourself to protect me. The truth would destroy you. They'd use it to prove criminal intent, conspiracy with a known criminal organization. You could go to prison. I'm aware of the potential consequences. And you're okay with that? With me being the one who provides evidence that puts you behind bars? I'm okay with you maintaining your integrity and staying out of federal prison for obstruction of justice." His voice was calm, absolute. "I made the choices that led to this investigation. I knew the risks. I won't compound my mistakes by asking you to lie under oath to protect me." Scarlett felt tears burning behind her eyes. "There has to be another way." "There is. I cooperate fully with the investigation, provide evidence about Constantine's operations in exchange for immunity, help them dismantle what's left of his organization, and accept whatever consequences come from my own actions." That's not immunity. That's a confession. It's taking responsibility. He moved to sit beside her, taking her hands in his. "I've spent 15 years operating in moral gray areas, justifying questionable choices because the end seemed worth the means. Maybe it's time I actually face consequences instead of finding ways around them. I won't let you go to prison for helping my mother." "You don't get to decide that. Neither do I, really. The prosecutor will make that choice based on the evidence and whether they think cooperation is worth more than prosecution." The next 3 months were a masterclass in legal negotiations and moral reckoning that tested everything they'd built together. Sebastian cooperated fully with federal investigators, providing information that helped dismantle 3 criminal organizations and recover millions in illegal proceeds. His testimony was precise, damning, and completely honest about his own involvement in arrangements that skirted legal boundaries. Scarlett gave her deposition, telling the truth about the deal for Eleanor's treatment while making it clear that she'd had no knowledge of the criminal connections at the time. Her testimony was credible, emotional, and painted Sebastian as someone who'd made questionable choices, motivated by compassion rather than criminal intent. The prosecutor reviewed everything, weighed the value of Sebastian's cooperation against the satisfaction of putting a billionaire behind bars, and made a calculated decision. Sebastian Wolf received immunity in exchange for continued cooperation with ongoing investigations. No prison time, no criminal record, just the requirement that he maintain complete distance from any organization or individual under federal scrutiny and submit to regular audits of Wolf Industries for the next 5 years. It was by any measure an extraordinary outcome that reflected both the value of Sebastian's testimony and the power of excellent legal representation funded by unlimited resources. But for Sebastian, it felt like both victory and failure combined. "I should have paid more," he said quietly the night the deal was finalized, standing at their windows overlooking the city he'd once owned in ways both legitimate and otherwise. "Should have faced real consequences instead of negotiating my way out of accountability." Scarlett wrapped her arms around him from behind, resting her cheek against his shoulder. "You gave them information that will put away people far worse than you. That matters." "Does it? Or am I just trading one moral compromise for another, convincing myself that cooperation is redemption when really it's just survival dressed up as principle?" "I think you're being too hard on yourself. You made mistakes. You're fixing them. That's all anyone can do." He turned to face her, and his eyes were troubled. "I want to be someone you can be proud of, not someone you have to make excuses for." "Then keep building what you're building. Keep choosing ethics over expedience. Keep being honest even when it's hard." She cupped his face in her hands. "You're not the man you were when we met, Sebastian. You're better. Not perfect, but better. And that's enough." "Is it? Is it really enough for you?" "Yes. Because I didn't fall in love with perfection. I fell in love with someone willing to change, to grow, to become better for the people he loves. That's more valuable than flawless virtue could ever be." He kissed her then, deep and grateful, and filled with emotion he couldn't quite voice. The wedding took place on a perfect April morning in a small garden venue upstate, far from the city and the complications that had defined their relationship from the start. Eleanor walked Scarlett down the aisle, healthy and radiant and crying tears of joy that her daughter had found someone who loved her enough to transform himself. Sebastian's few remaining friends from before his empire-building days attended, along with Victoria and Jennifer and the handful of people who'd witnessed their relationship evolve from professional antagonism to genuine partnership. The ceremony was simple, intimate, officiated by a judge who owed Sebastian a favor but agreed to keep the language free of any references to debts or obligations. They exchanged vows they'd written themselves, promises about honesty and partnership, and choosing each other despite complications. When Sebastian slid the wedding band onto Scarlett's finger, his hands were steady, his voice clear and certain. "I promise to spend every day earning the trust you've given me, to build a life worth your faith in me, to love you with the same intensity I once reserved for building empires, redirected towards something infinitely more valuable." Scarlett's vows were equally simple and profound. "I promise to stand beside you in darkness and light, to challenge you when you're wrong and support you when you're right, to love you not despite your flaws, but because your willingness to acknowledge and address them shows the kind of strength that matters most." They kissed as husband and wife while their small gathering applauded. Two people who'd found each other through impossible circumstances and chosen to stay despite every reason to run. The reception was exactly what they'd wanted. Good food, better wine, dancing under string lights as the sun set over gardens that smelled like spring and possibility. Sebastian held Scarlett close during their first dance, and she saw in his eyes the same wonder she felt, that somehow, despite everything, they'd made it here. "What are you thinking?" she asked as they swayed to music that had nothing to do with business or strategy or the complicated world they'd left behind for this one perfect day. "That I don't deserve you, that I'm grateful anyway, that I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of this moment." "You already are worthy. You just need to believe it." "I'm working on it." He smiled, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "With considerable help from my wife." "Your wife?" Scarlett repeated, testing the words. "I like how that sounds." "So do I. Though I suspect you're going to keep your own name professionally." "Obviously. I've built a reputation as Scarlett Hayes. I'm not throwing that away just because I married a former criminal mastermind turned legitimate businessman. Fair enough, as long as you're Scarlet Wolf in private. Deal. They danced until the stars came out, surrounded by people who loved them and believed in the future they were building together. 6 months later, Sebastian stood in front of the board of directors of Wolf Industries and announced a complete restructuring of the company's mission and values. Gone were the aggressive acquisition strategies and morally questionable partnerships. In their place, a commitment to sustainable business practices, ethical supply chains, and using company resources to address systemic problems rather than exploit them for profit. The announcement was met with mixed reactions. Some board members resigned, others stayed, intrigued by the challenge of building something genuinely good rather than just profitable. Sebastian appointed Scarlett as Chief Strategy Officer, a role that recognized her contributions and gave her real power to shape the company's direction. Together, they built initiatives that addressed affordable healthcare access, created educational opportunities for underserved communities, and used Wolf Industries' considerable resources to make actual positive change. It wasn't the empire Sebastian had once dreamed of building. It was better. Eleanor became involved with the company's healthcare initiatives, using her own experience to shape programs that helped other families navigate the nightmare of expensive treatments and limited options. She and Sebastian developed a relationship built on mutual respect and shared commitment to fixing the systems that had nearly killed her. "You're good for my daughter," Eleanor told Sebastian one afternoon while they reviewed grant proposals for a new clinical trial funding program. "Not because you have money or power, though those things certainly helped, but because you chose to be better for her. That's rare, Sebastian. Don't forget it." "I won't," he promised. "She reminds me daily." As if summoned by their conversation, Scarlett appeared in the conference room doorway, looking exhausted and exhilarated in equal measure. The proposal was approved, full funding for the next 5 years, FDA fast-track designation, everything we asked for. She crossed to Sebastian, kissing him despite her mother's presence. "We just funded research that could save thousands of lives." "You just funded research," Sebastian corrected. "This was your initiative, your proposal, your vision." "Our vision," she insisted. "We built this together." And that was the truth of it. Everything they'd built since that first contentious interview had been together. The relationship, the company transformation, the life they'd created from pieces of his past and her determination, and the choice to become better together than they'd been apart. 2 years after their wedding, Scarlett published her book. It became a bestseller, not because of Sebastian's name or connections, but because she'd written something true and valuable about power and gender and navigating corporate America with integrity intact. She gave interviews, spoke at conferences, became recognized as an expert in her own right, rather than just Sebastian Wolf's wife. He attended every speaking engagement he could, sitting in the audience with pride that radiated from every cell, watching the woman he loved command rooms full of people with the same fearlessness she'd shown in their first meeting. "You've created a monster," Victoria observed at one such event, watching Scarlett field questions with practiced ease. "She's brilliant, powerful, and completely unafraid of challenging conventional wisdom." "I didn't create anything," Sebastian replied. "I just got out of her way and provided resources. The brilliance was always there." "You're different than you were," Victoria said quietly. "Better, less cold, more human. Love will do that to you. So will choosing to be worthy of being loved." On their 3rd anniversary, they stood in the penthouse that had become their home, looking out at the city that had witnessed their entire journey. "Do you ever regret it?" Scarlett asked, leaning against Sebastian as they watched lights flicker across Manhattan. "Giving up the power you once had? The influence? The empire you built?" "No." His answer was immediate and certain. "I regret what I had to do to build that empire, but walking away from it to build something better, that's the best decision I ever made. Second only to hiring a stubborn assistant who challenged me in her first interview. I wasn't that stubborn. You told me I was insufferable and that you wouldn't be my slave in front of my entire executive board." "Okay, I was that stubborn." She turned to face him, rising on her toes to kiss him softly. "But you fell in love with me anyway. Best terrible decision I ever made." The worst, she agreed, echoing the sentiment from that first kiss in her shabby apartment hallway that felt like a lifetime ago. They'd come so far from that moment, from professional antagonism to genuine partnership, from moral compromise to ethical business, from two people operating alone to a unit that functioned better together than they ever had apart. The journey hadn't been easy. The complications hadn't disappeared just because they'd chosen each other. But they'd navigated it all with honesty and trust, and the kind of love that grew stronger through challenges rather than breaking under their weight. Sebastian had transformed from a ruthless billionaire with criminal connections into someone who used his considerable resources to make the world marginally better. Scarlett had evolved from an exhausted assistant drowning in medical debt to a powerful executive and published author shaping corporate ethics and healthcare policy. Together, they'd built something neither could have created alone, and as they stood in their home overlooking the city that had witnessed their entire story, both of them understood the fundamental truth that had carried them through every crisis and complication. Love wasn't about finding someone perfect. It was about finding someone willing to grow, to change, to become better for the people they loved. Sebastian had chosen to transform his empire and his ethics for Scarlett. She had chosen to stand beside him in his darkness and help him find his way toward light. And that choice, made every single day through actions both small and significant, was what made their story not just romantic, but real. The ruthless Mafia boss who'd built an empire on fear and calculated moves had become a man who chose mercy over violence, ethics over expedience, and love over power. The woman who'd challenged him from the beginning had become his equal partner in every sense, matching his strength with her own and building beside him rather than behind him. Together, they'd rewritten every rule, defied every expectation, and proven that redemption was possible when people chose it with absolute commitment. The city glittered beneath them, full of possibility and danger, and the same complications that had nearly destroyed them. But Sebastian and Scarlett weren't afraid anymore. They'd survived the worst and built something beautiful from the wreckage. And whatever came next, they'd face it the same way they'd faced everything else. Together, honest, and absolutely certain that choosing each other had been worth every risk. The collision of fire and ice had forged something unbreakable. A love story written in shades of gray, painted with moral complexity, and resolved not through perfect virtue, but through the choice to become better together. And in the end, that was enough, more than enough. It was everything.